Jon Snow's breath caught in his throat the moment he received the raven's message. It had arrived at Castle Black after days of harsh winds, tattered and bearing black wax, the stark sigil in silver flecks as if half chipped away by the cold. He opened it with trembling fingers. Ned Stark was dead, beheaded in King's Landing. The father he had both revered and resented for leaving too many questions unanswered, whose quiet acceptance of his bastard son had offered respite from scorn. That father was gone, executed as a traitor to the Iron Throne. The words were inked with shocking finality, each line like a hammer's blow on the anvil of Jon's world. The next morning, Jon stood in the courtyard, the wind biting fiercely at his cheeks. His brothers of the Night's Watch carried on around him, Alliser Thorne barking orders at recruits who lacked the skill to properly hold a spear, Samwell Tarly waddling across the yard trying to keep peace between two quarreling stewards. A hush fell over Jon's own mind, as though an overcast sky had dimmed his soul. He remembered the night in which he had nearly deserted to join Robb Stark, to avenge Ned, to stand by the brother he had long admired from afar. He'd been stopped by his brothers, Sam, PYP, and Gren. Duty had prevailed then, and he had returned, letting his emotions sink beneath a vow older than memory. Yet the vow had grown heavier now with the knowledge that, back in the north, Robb Stark was newly proclaimed king. A king in the north. Ned Stark's first trueborn son had gathered the bannermen, and the standard of the direwolf flew in defiance of the Iron Throne. Jon had tried to bury it all. The swirl of anger and sorrow, the urge to do more than stand on a frigid wall at the edge of the known world. He had made himself remain, following the tracks of wildlings, bracing for the coming winter. But day after day, ghosts hounded him, his father's memory and Robb's ascension pulling at him like a tide that would not recede. Even the ancient stones of the wall had begun to feel suffocating. At last, the moment of fracture arrived like a sudden gust. He could not keep his father's honor in mind and remain neutral while the man who had raised him, bastard or no, lay dishonored by the Lannisters. He could not reconcile being a man of the Watch, vowed to no family, father to no children, while his own brother was declared king. He had never been a man of greed or ambition. It was something else compelling him now, a whisper that told him the blood in his veins was not so simple. Perhaps Ned Stark's final gifts to him were not just memories but the key to a mystery that lay in his parentage. He did not understand that suspicion fully, yet it pressed upon him. And so, in the frigid hour before the dawn, Jon stole out from Castle Black. He rode south atop a borrowed horse. Ghost trotted by his side, silent and watchful, a white shadow on the whitened roads. As the snows piled thicker, he thought of the punishment for desertion. Death. Lord Commander Mormont would order it swiftly, his head parted from his body by the long, lethal blade of ice if it were still in the Watch's possession, or by Longclaw itself. Perhaps Mormont would yield that duty to Alliser Thorne, who would wield the sword with grim delight. Jon's breath came in clouds of worry. He was no oathbreaker by design, but as he rode away from the wall, he felt that the Watch itself had broken him. And if the vow bound him while the realm of House Stark was threatened, could that vow be just? He had to go. Ned Stark's memory was too strong. He traveled for days, stopping only to let the horse drink and to feed Ghost scraps of salted meat. The dark pines of the Wolfswood greeted him like old friends, though the gloom set in early each afternoon, blotting out the sun. At night, he shivered in the dells he chose for shelter. He had not let the light of a campfire announce his presence. Despite his desperate haste, caution warned him that the king's men might be searching for deserters or the Lannisters might have spies in the north. Every twig that snapped under the horse's hoofs set his pulse racing. Every silhouette in the distance was a potential foe. Yet he kept going, the only sense of direction in his mind, Winterfell if it still stood. But news outpaced him. The rumor was that Winterfell's lady was fleeing south, or so whispered a passing group of travelers on the high road. But that rumor twisted and changed with every new voice. Some said Lady Catelyn Stark had marched with Robb and was at Riverrun, others said she was hidden behind the walls of Moat Cailin. Most spoke of the young wolf, unstoppable in the field, capturing Jaime Lannister, winning battles left and right. Through the confusion, only one point was clear: Robb Stark had been declared king in the north. The Grey John, the Manderleys, the Boltons, the Umbers, lords large and small had bent the knee. If the South wanted to hang Ned Stark as a traitor, the North would close its gates and call Robb their rightful ruler. Winter had not yet come, but the chill in the realm had grown more merciless. Jon approached a weather-beaten crossroad. Beyond the twisting pines, he found himself gazing upon the old holdfast of a lesser lord who had once sworn fealty to the Starks. Here he came upon a handful of men in battered leather, sporting the direwolf sigil on their arms, sharing a meager meal around a flickering campfire. When they caught sight of Ghost padding silently, they all sprang to their feet with curses. Jon, armed only with long claw, raised a hand in a gesture of peace. "Hold," he called. "I mean no harm. I am Jon Snow of Winterfell. Lord." "Ned Stark was one of the men spat into the dirt. "We know who you are. They called you the bastard. Why do you ride from the wall wearing a black cloak?" Jon reined in his mount, confusion blending with anger in his chest. "I want to speak with Robb. My place is with him. You've deserted, by the look of you." The man who spoke was broad, with a scruffy brown beard. His eyes glinted with mistrust. "You will find no welcome unless the king says so. King Robb, the White Wolf they call him now, he's at Moat Cailin, or last we heard. Mayhaps he's marched again." Jon felt a twinge at that. King Robb, the White Wolf. There had been a time, not too distant, when Robb had been little more than a boy practicing swords under Roderick Castle's watchful eye. Now he commanded an army. Then I must go to him. The men exchanged glances. One scrawny lad, hardly more than 16, was the first to lower his spear. "We know not if he'll greet you with open arms or command your head on a spike, Snow. What we do know is the king might be grateful for any support. The times are dark and the Lannisters still hold your sisters. Or so the rumors say." A pang cut through Jon at the mention of his sisters. "Sansa, betrothed to that monster Joffrey. Arya, rumored missing, rumored in danger." He was too ignorant to know if they were truly safe. "I will face whatever the king sees fit," Jon said, voice heavy with determination. "But I must speak with him." After a short debate, the men offered him stale bread and allowed him to rest by their fire for an hour, exchanging rumors. They spoke of the young wolf's last known position, somewhere near the twins, forging alliances with the Freys, then a sweeping victory in the Whispering Wood. The conversation bristled with the fierce pride that the North had reclaimed after Ned Stark's beheading. Jon parted ways, uneasy but driven by something that smoldered hotter than fear. As he continued, he tried to imagine how this new king in the North would receive him. Robb had always been kind, but the gap between them had been as wide as their mother's hostility. Jon could not forget Lady Catelyn's stern face, her unwavering gaze of disapproval whenever she looked at him. Still, Ned Stark had always said, "He is your brother," and so Robb had tried to treat Jon as best he could. Yet now, with battle and grief forging the soul of a king, Jon sensed that things might have changed. Could Robb truly trust a deserter? If Jon returned, pledging his sword to the king in the North, would that suffice? A voice in Jon's mind asked, "But is that all you want, to serve as one more sword?" A swirl of doubt lingered, the oath to the watch weighed heavily on his shoulders, a black brand that would never wash off. Yet Ned Stark's memory kindled an altogether different flame. Sometimes, late at night, Jon remembered half-explanations, the hush in Ned's voice when pressed about Jon's mother. He felt an odd sense of destiny, a weight that seemed to press him into the shape of a claimant. Claimant to what? He was but a bastard. Still, the disquiet remained. It was near twilight when Jon, cold and bone-tired, made his way through the boggy approaches to Moat Cailin. The wind sighed, carrying the sound of distant war horns echoing across the wetlands. Plumes of torches flickered in the fortress ruins where the tumble-down towers still stood, battered by centuries. Northmen patrolled the outer walls. Their challenge rang out, "Halt! Who goes there?" Jon announced himself once more. This time, the response was suspicious yet subdued. He found himself escorted through the half-crumbled gatehouse, Ghost at his heels. Inside, a makeshift camp sprawled, tents and lean-tos set up in the courtyard, horses stamping, blacksmiths hammering. The tang of wood smoke, sweat, and damp earth filled the air. Men in northern sigils scurried to and fro, carrying messages, weapons, and supplies. At the far end of the courtyard, a modest command tent bore the Stark sigil. Before it stood Grey Wind, Robb's direwolf, pacing with measured grace. Jon dismounted, uncertain. When Grey Wind caught wind of Ghost, the large direwolf let out a low growl, but one that carried a note of recognition. Ghost peered silently back, tail swishing, ears up but unafraid. The men parted, and from within the tent stepped Robb Stark himself. He looked older, even in that flicker of torchlight, taller, broad of shoulder, his face sharper with tension. Light brown curls hung around eyes that had seen battle. His sword belt was strapped across a boiled leather jerkin, direwolf sigils etched at the shoulders. He froze in surprise at the sight of Jon, and that surprise softened into something unreadable. "Jon," Robb said. His voice betrayed a swirl of emotions. Relief, anger, confusion, and something else. He stepped forward. Gray wind came to his side. "You are here, after all." Jon offered a low bow. "Your Grace," he said, the words tasting awkward, both foreign and somehow right. "I deserted the wall. I could not stay there while your war is fought." Robb's eyes flickered with disapproval and understanding both. "You come at a precarious time. We have only just begun to consolidate the North. The Southern Lords, Karstark, Umber, Glover, they march with me. The Lords beyond the Neck have declared for me, but we are scattered." He drew a breath, anger creeping in. "And you, by your own admission, are an oathbreaker now. The penalty for desertion is death." Jon lowered his eyes. His stomach twisted at the harshness in Robb's tone, for he had dreamed, naively perhaps, that his half-brother would greet him as family. But Ned Stark's death had changed so many things. "I won't defend my actions," Jon said, "but I had to come. Our father." The words caught in his throat. He was no traitor. His memory can't be left to shame. Robb's jaw tightened. He wasn't a traitor. He turned to face Grey Wind, who stared unblinking. "But I cannot lightly set aside the laws we hold sacred. The Watch is the shield that guards the realms of men." "You turned your back on that. And if I show leniency, do I also open the door for others to break their vows?" Men had begun to gather, forming a ring around the two. The Watchers seemed curious, some even sympathetic, but all recognized that a line was drawn between the king in the north and his bastard half-brother. Jon could feel their stares prickling at his back. "I offer my sword to you to the north," Jon said. "I will fight for you, Robb. I will bleed for you if you need me to. The cause must be bigger than my vow or my life." Robb shook his head. "You think I don't crave the presence of family?" He gave a brittle laugh. "I lost father. Bran and Rickon are at Winterfell. My mother is off forging alliances or gathering support. I have only my men and Grey Wind's nose for treachery. Part of me wants to embrace you, Jon. But there is a line between king and subject, especially now. I can't just let sentiment sway me." A swirl of conflicting emotions roiled in Jon. Perhaps he should not have come. But he had. "Father raised me to understand honor and justice," he said, voice quiet but firm. "He once told me that everything before the word but is meaningless. So I will ask plainly, if you would punish me for desertion, do so. If you command me to go back, I won't comply. I cannot stand aside while the Lannisters hold Sansa and Arya, if they even still live." A hush fell. Robb's men shifted uncomfortably. Then Robb's gaze softened by a bare fraction. He gestured to the men. "Leave us," he commanded. "Wait outside the tent." Jon followed him in. The command tent was lit by a brazier, shadows dancing across the canvas walls. A table was strewn with maps, dispatches, half-burned candles. There, once the flap fell closed, Robb dropped some of his regal bearing. "If I kill you, I would break my own heart as well as the memory of father," he admitted. "But I am king now, and a king must obey the law or risk losing the respect of his men." Jon's throat felt tight. "Then kill me quickly." Robb let the silence hang for a moment. "But if you are dead, what does that serve? You're my brother, yes, we share a father." He paced away, frustration swirling. "I am no savage. I cannot put my own brother to death while my enemies gather in the south. But if I accept you, Jon, half my lords will sneer that I condone oath-breaking. It's no small thing, especially when I'm trying to unite them all. We have lords who are uneasy, proud men who cling to old laws. Men like Roose Bolton who watch for the smallest sign of weakness." Jon stood tall, though inside he felt little more than a trembling boy. "What do you mean to do, your grace?" Robb raked a hand through his curls. "I need time," he said, "and counsel. If you're willing, stay in my camp for now, but keep your head down. I'll have to talk to the great Jon, to Lord Bolton, to Lord Manderley. I need to see what mercy they can stomach." That was more than Jon had dared hope. He bowed in the stiff, untrained way of a man new to addressing a king. "Thank you," he murmured. Robb placed a hand on Jon's shoulder then, a moment of brotherly closeness. "I am sorry," he whispered, voice raw. "About father. About all of this." Jon's eyes glistened, though he fought to keep them dry. As am I. In the days that followed, the news that Jon Snow, Ned Stark's bastard, had come to join the king in the north spread through the camp like wildfire. Some men spit, branding him an oathbreaker unworthy of trust. Others shrugged that desperate times sometimes called for desperate measures. A few saw him as a symbol, the lost wolf returning home. A handful whispered that perhaps Jon Snow was not so baseborn as they had believed, that there was more to him. Rumors always abounded in the north, especially among the small folk who dwelled near the bogs and crannogs, spinning tales of hidden births and secret lineages. Jon heard these rumors as the men sharpened their steel in the mornings and as they sipped warmed ale at night. He listened but did not speak, unsure if any of it contained truth. Robb held councils behind closed tent flaps with his leading lords, deliberating over Jon's fate. Those nights, Jon would sit alone outside, Ghost at his side, staring into the black sky. He felt an odd kind of hope, the faintest whisper that his brother might welcome him, might let him fight for their father's honor. But whenever he remembered the law, his chest grew tight. He did not regret leaving the watch, but he keenly felt the weight of that brand on his neck. Deserter. And yet, in the third day after his arrival, Robb made a decision. The sun had just crested, bathing the swampy ground in eerie morning light, when trumpets sounded a call to assembly. Word spread that the king would speak. Jon felt his stomach twist. He pulled on his cloak of black wool, the only one he possessed, and strapped Longclaw to his belt, emerging from his small, damp tent. The soldiers were gathering in a rough circle near the gatehouse, where a wooden platform had been hastily erected for the king. Lords with their standards ringed the area. A roaring bear for Mormont, the white sunburst for Karstark, the flayed man for Bolton, the twin towers for Frey's men, a scattering of smaller houses. The dire wolf of Stark flew largest, snapping in the breeze. Jon stood amidst the common soldiers, who parted warily to give him space. A hush spread as Robb mounted the platform, gray wind close by. Near Robb stood the great Jon, a towering bear of a man with a booming voice. On the other side stood Roose Bolton, pale and quiet, eyes flicking over the crowd with disconcerting calm. A dozen others formed a half-circle of council. Robb cleared his throat and projected, "Men of the North, I summon you here to address a concern. My brother, Jon Snow, has deserted the Night's Watch and come to offer his sword to our cause." He paused. "By our laws, the penalty for desertion is death. Yet I would be a poor king indeed to kill my own brother who wishes only to fight for our land against the Lannisters that slaughtered our father. This is no easy matter. The law is clear, but these are trying times. Our cause is just yet precarious. The Lannisters have declared war upon us, upon our honor, upon our people. Must we shed the blood of a willing man, even if that man once swore different vows?" A buzz of murmuring spread through the assembly. Some men shook their heads, others frowned. The great Jon stepped forward. "Your Grace, I speak for many of your lords, I think, when I say that desertion cannot be condoned lightly. If we are to remain strong, we must not flout the laws of old. Yet we are in no time to turn away stout swords." His booming voice echoed across the courtyard. "The bastard is a Stark in everything but name. The men of Winterfell remember him well. I say we let the White Wolf fight for us. We've use of every good warrior who'll stand with you, my king." A scattering of cheers erupted from some corners. Others only muttered or stood silent. Bolton's voice cut through, soft and measured. "But we are also not so weak as to need lawbreakers, are we? If the king in the north breaks the law openly, we risk emboldening other oathbreakers. Where does that lead us? The Watch might see it as betrayal. They might turn on us. We also cannot ignore the possibility that the bastard may be a spy or an agent of the Lannisters seeking to sow division among us." His pale eyes flicked to Jon. "I do not say he is, only that the possibility exists. Caution is the wise course, your grace." Jon felt a stab of anger, but he forced it down, reminding himself that Roose Bolton was known for cunning and cruelty. He dared not speak out of turn. "Let the king decide, and let him do it from strength, not from an outburst." Robb nodded. "Your words have weight, Lord Bolton, and so do yours, great Jon. Let me make it plain. My brother is no Lannister dog. He's bled with me in training yards. He's grown under our father's roof. His reasons are his own, but I do not doubt his loyalty. Okay, a breath. I have considered the demands of the law and the demands of necessity. We cannot say the Night's Watch will come for him. They have their own troubles beyond the wall, from what we hear. I doubt they can spare men to seek a deserter. If they do, we will not block them from pursuing their justice. But for now, let Jon Snow stand with us. Let him prove himself in battle. If that is not enough to satisfy the men of the North, I will revisit the matter. But let us not slay a brother willing to fight for our cause." Jon's heart hammered. There were some murmurs and ripples, but the great Jon let out a resounding "Aye" that rattled the timbers of the platform. Others joined in, some less enthusiastic. Roose Bolton's expression was a careful mask, but he nodded, yielding to the king's pronouncement. For now it was done. Jon's life was spared, and he would remain among the army of the North. A flood of relief coursed through him, followed by the realization that he had just pinned his fate to a precarious throne of rebellious lords. In the weeks that followed, the army moved south, searching for advantage against the Lannister forces. The bogs gave way to the wide, flat expanse of the Green Forks floodplains. Scouts reported back on enemy positions. The Outriders skirmished with remnants of Lannister scouting parties, capturing a few prisoners. Each day, Robb called councils with his commanders. Jon was never invited to these councils. It stung, but he accepted it. He was no lord, no knight, no recognized son of Eddard Stark. He was a bastard and a deserter. He had to earn his place here, or else prove unworthy. Even so, the men noted his skill in the practice yards. Longclaw's Valyrian steel whirled in the morning drills, and soon, some began calling him the Black Wolf. Less official, perhaps mocking, but a name all the same. Though tensions existed, Jon found allies. Daisy Mormont, the Lady of Bear Island's daughter, fought with a fierce energy, and she treated him with a brusque respect. The great Jon boomed laughter whenever Jon bested an opponent in sparring. But it was among the common soldiers that Jon found acceptance more freely. They admired the dire wolf at his side, and they whispered that perhaps a man who had walked the wall had some special knowledge or strength. Over their cups at night, they asked him about wildlings and giants, half hoping for tales to chase away the gloom. Jon obliged with some stories, carefully omitting that the others might be stirring beyond the wall. He did not wish to spread panic nor overshadow the war at hand. Still, he sometimes wondered if that threat loomed larger than anything in the south. As the Northmen pressed on, they came upon fields blackened with old battles. Broken banners and rusted helms told stories of prior conflicts. The war in the Riverlands raged fiercely, and the smell of death followed them. Villages were razed, the small folk scattered or starved. Seeing this, Jon's resentment of the Lannisters grew sharper, fueling his determination to one day cross swords with the men who had taken his father's head. Yet an unease persisted. Every time he caught Robb's eye across the campfires, something unspoken hung between them. They were still brothers, but now a gulf had opened, a gulf of kingship and bastard stigma and the uncertain future. Robb's burdens weighed on him, and Jon could sense how it wore down the boy they'd both once known. Then, on a gray morning, a rider came galloping into camp with urgent tidings, another letter from King's Landing. The king in the north read it behind closed flaps with his mother, Lady Catelyn, who had joined them in the night. Word spread quickly that Joffrey Baratheon had declared Ned Stark's memory that of a traitor and demanded Robb's immediate surrender under threat of Sansa's execution. Worse yet, rumor claimed Arya had vanished entirely with no certainty as to her whereabouts. The tension in camp skyrocketed as men whispered about the Lannisters' threats. Robb was forced to decide how best to respond lest he lose Sansa entirely. Some lords called for immediate attack. Others insisted on negotiation to spare the girl's life. Jon listened to what rumors he could glean, his anger simmering. If they threatened Sansa, was it not time to storm south and lay waste to the Lannisters? That was his first reaction. But then he heard Lady Catelyn speak, "We must find a path to retrieve my daughter, not rush to kill her along with the Lannisters." A single rash move could cost Sansa her head. Her voice was layered with sorrow and desperation. Jon's heart twisted. He could not forget how Lady Catelyn had looked at him over the years as though he were an infestation. Yet he felt for her as she was losing everything. His sisters were in danger, too. He clenched his fists in impotence, wishing there were a simpler path. But there was nothing simple in war. At midday, the horns sounded a call to muster. In the center of camp, Robb and Catelyn stood side by side, the direwolf banner behind them. Lady Catelyn was travel-worn, her auburn hair bound in a loose braid, eyes rimmed with fatigue. In a clear, steady voice, she relayed the threat from Joffrey: surrender, or Sansa would be harmed. The men of the North responded with growls and curses, some calling for immediate assault on King's Landing. She asked for unity to not let wrath overtake them. Robb stood silent through most of it, letting his mother speak. Then, at the end, he declared, "They think we are disorganized, that we will scatter in fear for one hostage. They know nothing of the North's resolve. We will continue to press forward. We will free my sister, or we will make the Lannisters rue the day they dared harm one of our blood." The men roared approval. But as the crowd dispersed, Jon saw Lady Catelyn place a hand on Robb's arm, leaning in with urgent words. The king nodded, face grim. Jon caught only a fragment. "We must do all we can to save her, and that means we must stay united." Jon's days turned into a blur of drilling, marching, sleeping on cold ground, repeating. Despite not being admitted into the war councils, his presence was tolerated. The men recognized his skill with a blade and would, on occasion, request his help in training the newer recruits. Through it all, Robb was a distant presence. A king burdened by endless tasks, commanding outriders, forging alliances with the River Lords, and exchanging ravens with Lord Walder Frey. Only occasionally did Jon catch a private moment with him. It was after one night's march, the moon shrouded by clouds, when Robb found Jon nursing an aching shoulder near a small campfire. All the other men had bedded down, leaving only the gentle crackling of the flames to pierce the silence. Robb sank to a crouch beside Jon, gray wind padding up to nuzzle at the king's hand. "How fares your shoulder?" Robb asked. Jon shrugged, rotating the arm gingerly. "I'll live." A man from Bolton's company misjudged a pike thrust during drills. "Jammed me hard." He allowed a small grimace, but no more. "It's only bruised." They sat in silence a moment, hearing the quiet night. Then Robb's voice was low. "I remember the day Father left for King's Landing. I was so eager to remain in Winterfell as its lord, to prove myself. Now, sometimes I wish Father had taken me along, or I had insisted on following him. At least I would have been with him in his final days." Jon's jaw clenched. "I wish he were here. He would know what to do." Robb nodded. "I have to be king now. No one else can bear that burden, but I'm just trying not to fail the North. So many rely on me. And Mother, she demands I weigh Sansa's life above all else. Perhaps she's right. But we can't simply give the Lannisters everything they want." He studied Jon's face in the glow of the firelight. "They call you the Black Wolf now, did you know that?" Jon let out a breath, half-laugh. "I've heard it. A slight improvement over Snow, I suppose." Robb's gaze flickered. "You want more than just to be a soldier, don't you?" The question lingered like an echo. Jon opened his mouth but found the words slow to form. "I'm not sure what I want," he admitted. "I once wanted to take the black and serve with honor because that was my best path as a bastard. Now I see how the world truly is, how each man must carve out his place or be cast aside. I know only that I want justice for Father, and I want to protect our family." Robb studied him carefully. "We are both fatherless now," he said. "We must find our path. But you have to understand, my place is precarious. Even if I wanted to legitimize you or give you some formal station, half the lords would balk at acknowledging a deserter as a prince of the North or even as a recognized Stark." He sighed. "I don't have an easy solution." Jon's throat constricted. The notion of being recognized as a true Stark had once been his boyhood dream. But how naive to think it could be so simple. "I understand, Your Grace. I do not ask for any more than to fight. If it helps your cause, let me do so under your banner. If it doesn't, point me to the front lines and I will do my duty anyway. I have no illusions. I just want to fight for Ned Stark. And for the North." Robb lowered his gaze. "You will have your chance to fight," he said softly, standing. "May the gods have mercy on us all." They parted, both uneasy. The days rolled on and rumors of a Lannister host moving north spread like wildfire. Reports claimed that Tywin Lannister led a considerable force aiming to crush Robb's rebellion or corner him in the Riverlands. The talk of a pitched battle loomed. The men of the North braced themselves, sharpening swords and axes, mending armor, steeling their spirits for the war. Catelyn Stark rode in haste to treat with certain river lords, leaving Robb in command with his advisors. The fords of the Trident became crucial as they always did in these conflicts. Near a shallow crossing by the Red Fork, Robb decided to entrench his men, expecting Tywin Lannister to approach from the east. Jon was assigned to a company led by the Great Jon, who welcomed him with a hearty clap on the back. "You fight well, bastard," the large man said, "and if you have half the skill Ned Stark had, I'll be proud to ride beside you." Jon simply nodded. The Great Jon was a simpler man compared to the Boltons or Karstarks, driven by loyalty, pride, and an appetite for victory. That night, the camp was rife with tension, men double-checking their kits, ensuring their horses were fed. Jon walked the lines, Ghost padding at his side, listening to the hush that descended before battle. The war horns might sound at dawn or midday or in the middle of the night, depending on how Tywin Lannister approached. Dawn broke pale and cold, a thin mist clinging to the fields. At first, there was only silence, then the watchman's call, riders approaching from the east. Jon and the men scrambled into formation, their hearts pounding. Robb's personal guard arrayed near a stand of oaks by the river, gray wind prowling restlessly. The Greyjohn's company, with Jon among them, formed the center line. Up ahead, Bolton's men formed a left flank, the Karstarks on the right. Horns sounded in long, echoing blasts, reverberating across the plain. The sun broke through the mist at last, revealing a glint of armor on the horizon. The Lannister host approached in disciplined columns. Tom stilled, a moment of suspended breath. Then Robb gave the order, and the drums began to pound. The northern ranks advanced at a measured pace. Jon felt the stir in his blood, the cold tang of fear mixing with the heat of anger. Ghost stayed back from the lines as dire wolves were ill-suited to massed formations, but the white beast watched, hackles raised. Jon gripped Longclaw's hilt. He spotted a wave of Lannister horse on the right, sweeping toward the Karstark men. A swirl of dust rose where cavalry clashed. The shrieks of men and horses cut through the air. Ahead of Jon, foot soldiers in crimson cloaks advanced, pikes and spears gleaming. The Great Jon bellowed a war cry for the king in the north. Their lines collided, steel on steel, a cacophony of screams and curses and splintering shields. Jon found himself face to face with a Lannister spearman who thrust forward with savage force. Jon sidestepped, slashed with Longclaw. The Valyrian steel bit through leather and mail as if they were parchment. The man's blood sprayed, a wide arc of vivid red. Jon grimaced, but there was no time to dwell. Another attacker lunged from the side, and Jon pivoted, parrying. The clang echoed in his bones. He riposted, cutting down the second foe. The field was chaos, men locked in brutal combat, the ground turning slick with mud and blood. The Great Jon roared, hammering aside two men with his immense battle-axe. Bolton's flank held, though Jon glimpsed the flayed man banner in a swirl of dust as they pushed forward. The Northmen fought with ferocity, spurred by Ned Stark's memory and the presence of the young king. Robb himself was somewhere on the left, presumably leading a cavalry maneuver. Now and again, Jon heard the distinct howling of gray wind, a direwolf's savage cry that chilled even the bravest heart. Hours bled together in that morass of death. Jon swung Longclaw, taking a blow on his shield that nearly shattered his arm, returning the strike with lethal precision. He stumbled over a half-buried corpse, regained his footing, and clashed again with a Lannister footman, sending the man sprawling. Around him, the Greyjohn's bellowing voice urged the men on, refusing to yield an inch. After a furious exchange, the Lannister line wavered. Horns sounded again, this time from the north. A wave of horsemen emerged, bearing the Manderly sigil. They crashed into the Lannister flank, and the Crimson line cracked, men fleeing or collapsing. The battle's tide had turned. By evening, the field belonged to the north. The Lannister forces had retreated to the east or else lay dead on the field. Bodies littered the ground, crows already circling. The smell of gore was thick, a stench of iron and awful. The Northmen were not unscathed. Many good men had fallen, among them some of Bolton's and Karstark's best. It was a savage day. Jon was exhausted, his arms trembling, blood spattered across his armor, some of it his own from minor cuts. But they had one. At the heart of the battered camp, Robb Stark presided over a gathering of lords, counting the dead, planning the next move. When Jon arrived, limping slightly, he saw that Robb himself had a slash across his forearm. Lady Catelyn was nowhere to be seen, still away. The Great Jon slapped Jon on the back, praising his skill and bravery before turning to discuss the shape of the next campaign. Jon lingered on the edge, uncertain if he belonged. But Robb beckoned him closer. "I heard you fought well," he said quietly, though loud enough for the lords to overhear. There was a respect in his gaze. "I'm grateful for every sword." Roose Bolton nodded slowly, his pale face betraying nothing. "One cannot deny the bastard's skill. I witnessed him cut through 3 of the Lannisters in quick succession." Jon grimaced inwardly at Bolton's mention of the bastard, but at least it was not condemnation. He gave a curt nod to the Lord. Their lines broke. "We only pursued," he said, offering no boast. The great Jon rumbled a laugh. "He's modest as well as deadly. Reminds me of a young Ned, eh?" Robb's face flickered with an emotion Jon could not name, perhaps sadness at the mention of their father. But then he squared his shoulders. "We must see to the wounded, secure the field, and plan our next step. Tywin has retreated for now, but he'll regroup. This was a victory, but not the end." They set about caring for the fallen and the injured. Jon helped bind wounds, passing on small bits of knowledge learned at Castle Black. Many men recognized him that evening, nodding in weary thanks. As darkness fell, a hush of sorrow and exhaustion draped the camp. They had won, yet the cost was high and the war was far from done. In the aftermath, Robb called Jon to his tent. By the brazier's light, Robb unbuckled his armor, flinching at the pain of the slash on his arm. He had refused to let the maester fuss over him until the men were tended. Now the blood was crusted on the leather. Jon moved to help him remove the cuirass with gentle tugs. "Thank you," Robb murmured, face drawn. "Gods, I'm tired." Jon nodded, silent. When the armor was off, he fetched water and cloth, cleaning the wound as best he could. Robb sucked in his breath but bore the pain without complaint. He studied Jon's face in the firelight. "You took wounds yourself?" "Only minor," Jon said, dabbing carefully at Robb's gash. "I'll live." Robb gave a faint smile. "We all keep saying that. We'll live. But with each battle, it seems we lose more. I've lost men I've known since childhood." Jon felt the rawness of it, too. "War is never kind," he said. "But we fight because we must." Robb's gaze flicked down, and when he looked up, there was a new intensity. "Jon, the men noticed your courage today. They talk. Some of them even say that you, not I, might be the true scion of Ned Stark." Jon stiffened, hands pausing in their work. "I've heard these rumors. They're baseless. I'm a bastard, that's all." Robb inhaled. "Father never spoke of your mother. He carried her name to his grave." "Are you so sure you're only a bastard?" Anger pricked Jon, though it was not directed at Robb. "If you know something of my birth, speak of it. I've spent my life hearing nothing." Robb looked away. "I know nothing certain. Only that father was a man of great honor. Some say it was unthinkable he bedded a woman in the south. Others recall seeing him return from the war with a babe. Others whisper that you might have come from somewhere else entirely, from a Targaryen princess or some such madness. I never put weight in those tales. But they swirl, and in war, rumors can become dangerous. Some might even say you have a stronger claim to leadership than I do." Jon let out a short laugh devoid of humor. "A bastard with no name? That's no claim. That's what I tell them," Robb said, voice low. "But if the men begin to speak otherwise, if they believe you are the rightful heir to the north for some reason, or that you're a symbol of something greater, it could sow division. We can't afford that." Jon's lips pressed tight. "I do not want your crown. I came to fight for you, not against you." "I know," Robb said, sincerity in his eyes. "I believe you. But men are men. They see the White Wolf, they see your prowess, they recall your father's quiet mysteries, and they spin stories. We must be careful, Jon." Jon nodded, though dread coiled in his stomach. The last thing he wanted was to undermine Robb or the cause. He had only wanted to stand for their father's memory. Now he was caught in a swirl of half-truths and political maneuvering. He resumed washing Robb's wound in silence. When he finished, Robb clasped his hand. "Be mindful," Robb said gently. "I do not want to see you harmed for rumors you never asked for." Jon returned the clasp. "Nor do I wish you any challenge to your rule, brother." "Your grace. We stand together, always." They parted on that solemn note, the question of Jon's parentage stirring uncomfortably in the shadows of both their minds. It was a few days later, as the army regrouped and prepared for further maneuvers, that Lady Catelyn returned from her diplomatic foray. She arrived at dusk, accompanied by several knights of the Riverlands, their banners torn and muddy from travel. The camp stirred. Why? Tish knew tension as she dismounted, her eyes scanning for Robb. When she saw Jon, her gaze hardened. She offered no greeting, only a slight incline of her head. He responded in kind, grateful at least that she did not openly denounce him. She found Robb in his tent, and for an hour, the voices within were loud enough for the guards outside to shift uncomfortably. Lady Catelyn was not pleased with certain developments. Jon gleaned that from the talk around the camp. Some said she demanded that Robb cast out the deserter, that he was a stain on House Stark's honor. Others said she was outraged that Robb had risked open battle when Sansa's life was still in question. The truth was likely a mix of all these concerns. Eventually, word came that Lady Catelyn wanted to see Jon. He entered the tent with caution. Inside, Catelyn and Robb stood side by side, tension in every line of their bodies. The braziers cast shifting shadows across their faces. Catelyn's voice was cold. "Jon Snow, or should I call you the Black Wolf now?" Jon forced himself to meet her eyes. "Jon Snow is fine, my lady." She pursed her lips. "I had hoped the Watch would keep you away from this war, for your own good as much as for ours. Yet here you are, with a stolen vow at your back, and talk among the men that you might have some claim." Jon's jaw tightened. "I didn't ask them to talk. I serve Robb." She narrowed her eyes. "Your presence is a distraction at best, a danger at worst. The Lannisters would jump at the chance to exploit any sign of division. The Watch might hold our entire house accountable for harboring a deserter. Have you thought of that?" He held his tongue to keep from snapping back. "I have," he said. "I will accept whatever punishment you deem necessary if it comes to that. But the North is threatened. My sisters are threatened. I made a choice." Catelyn glanced at Robb, and for a moment, her face softened with maternal concern. Then she spoke, voice steady but firm. "You say you fight for the North. Then prove it. Stand behind Robb with no ambition, no claim, no whisper of anything else. If I hear you so much as consider pressing a claim, I will demand you be sent away, or worse." Jon felt the old sting of her hatred. He accepted it. "I have no ambition to be anything but a sword in Robb's service." Robb's voice cut in, more gently. "Mother, you have my word that Jon is loyal." She pressed her lips together in disapproval. "Your father was loyal to King Robert, and look where that brought him. Trust is precious. We cannot squander it." Her eyes flicked between the two of them, steel beneath her sorrow. "All I want is to rescue my daughters and preserve my house. If your presence jeopardizes that, I will not hesitate." With that, she moved past Jon to the tense exit, leaving only the faint scent of travel dust and tension behind. Jon stood there, fists clenched at his sides. Robb exhaled. "She's lost so much. She's terrified of losing more." "I know," Jon replied quietly, releasing a breath he did not realize he'd been holding. "I don't blame her." But at night, when he lay in a small tent apart from the lords, Jon could not sleep. He stared at the canvas ceiling, replaying her words in his mind. Could his very existence threaten House Stark's unity? Could it be that in seeking to protect them, he'd only brought new dangers? Guilt gnawed at him. Yet beneath that guilt lay another emotion, an ember that refused to die, indignation. He had a right to defend his family. He had bled on the battlefield for the North. Must he always be the outsider, the one whose loyalty was questioned? A new chill had settled in the air, heralding the approach of winter. The entire camp felt the shift as they prepared for the next move, uncertain where Tywin Lannister would strike. They also waited on news from Riverrun, word of whether the southern lords in the Riverlands would join their cause or begin fracturing. The war hinged on alliances, on cunning, on blades, and the realm's future was as uncertain as the next dawn. It was on one of these tense days that a messenger arrived from Winterfell. He bore a letter addressed to Jon Snow, sealed with the direwolf sigil, though the writing was in the shaky hand of Maester Luwin. Jon's heart jumped at the sight of it. He retreated to a quiet spot by the riverbank, Ghost at his side, and broke the seal. The letter was short, containing tidings from the castle. Bran and Rickon were well, but frightened by the news of war. The Maester warned that the roads had grown perilous, with bandits and ironborn raiders rumored to be stirring along the coast. But the crux of the letter was this: "My lord, if you can be called such, you must know that rumors abound about your birth. A man from the south arrived, demanding to speak with you. He claimed knowledge of who your mother was, and how Lord Eddard Stark took you in. I turned him away, for your sake and for Winterfell's safety, but he left certain cryptic notes. I send copies now, though I place no stock in them. Be wary." Jon's pulse hammered as he read. Copies of the notes were included, the ink blotched in a shaky script. "The boy is of the dragon's line. R+L=J. The truth was hidden to keep him safe. Now the realm must know." Over and over, the same references. Jon's mind spun. R+L=J. It made no sense at first, but then recollections from the past came flooding back. Rumors that Rhaegar Targaryen had loved Lyanna Stark. Jon's hand shook. Could it be that Lyanna was his mother? That Rhaegar was his father? Seemed monstrous, preposterous. but the swirl of half-hints he'd encountered over the years Ned Stark's reticence. The moment of tension each time Jon asked about his mother. The rumored location of his birth around the time of Robert's rebellion. If it were true, it meant he was not merely a bastard of House Stark. He was also Targaryen, the blood of dragons mingled with the blood of wolves. It sounded like a fever dream, yet that note in the letter left him trembling with possibilities. The messenger from the south had apparently been turned away, but would he remain silent? Or would he carry these secrets to others, sowing rumors that might upend everything? Jon's breathing grew ragged. He stared into the river, the waters reflecting the dim sky. If the rumor spread, it would overshadow any question of whether he was a rightful Stark. It could mean that he held a claim not only to the north but to the Iron Throne itself. The magnitude of that was crushing. He wanted no crown, had never desired it. Yet how would others react? Some might rally to him as a Targaryen heir, seeking an alternative to the Lannisters or even to the exiled Daenerys Targaryen, if she yet lived. Others might deem him an even greater threat to Robb's claim, dividing the North as half the lords might prefer Ned Stark's own bloodline over a rebellious son they barely knew. War within war, chaos within chaos. He crumpled the notes in his fist, cursing softly. He couldn't speak of it to Robb, not now. The king in the north was already burdened. Telling him might tear the bond between them. Or perhaps Robb, in his sense of honor, would do the unthinkable, bend the knee to Jon. Jon swallowed that horrifying thought. No, Robb would never do that. Nor would Jon ask it of him. They were brothers. They had to remain that. But if these rumors spread, would it be a matter of time before the lords demanded answers? Jon spent the rest of the afternoon pacing the riverbank, the note's words circling in his head. By dusk, he had resolved to keep it secret. Let no one know. He would bury the rumor as best he could. Even if it were true, he wanted none of the fruits it offered. Let Robb be king in the north. Let the war be fought for Ned Stark's memory, not for some half-Targaryen bastard's uncertain birthright. With a shudder, Jon cast the letters into the river, watching the water swallow the ink and parchment until they were gone. He burned the rest in a small, discreet fire. The smoke curled up into the twilight sky, taking our +L=J with it, or so he hoped. But secrets rarely stay buried in times of war. As the embers died, Jon steeled himself, suspecting that this knowledge might one day come to light whether he willed it or not. That night, he laid among the men, staring at the stars, trying to calm his racing thoughts. He told himself that, bastard or Targaryen or both, his duty was clear. Fight for the North, fight for his family, keep them safe. If the day came when the secret spilled out, he would face it then. For now, he would be Jon Snow, the Black Wolf, brother to the king in the north. The war churned on. Raids and skirmishes cropped up across the riverlands. Winterfell sent word of uncertain alliances. The Ironborn began to stir, sending reavers to the coasts, and rumors reached the camp that Balon Greyjoy was preparing ships. Tension mounted further as the North's lines grew stretched. Robb dispatched certain lords back to hold key points. Lady Catelyn again departed on some mission, likely to negotiate or gather allies. All the while, Tywin's forces regrouped, and the possibility of a second major battle grew near. The storm clouds of war hung overhead. At dawn one day, as the men readied for another march, a pair of riders approached under a tattered flag of truce. They claimed to bear words from King Joffrey. Robb received them in the open, flanked by lords and a cluster of armed guards. Jon lingered at the edges, watching. The herald spat out Joffrey's demands: unconditional surrender, fealty to the Iron Throne, acceptance of Ned Stark's guilt as a traitor, or Sansa would die. The lords erupted in fury, shouting down the herald. Robb kept a stony silence, letting them rage. When at last the herald asked, "What is your reply, your grace?" Robb simply said, "Winter is coming," and turned away. The herald fled, uncertain if that was a threat or a prophecy. That night, the camp was ablaze with determination to free Sansa, to punish the Lannisters. Jon sat with his sword across his lap, ghost curled at his feet. He was alone near the outskirts, wanting space from the men's feverish talk of revenge. The truth he carried felt heavier than any sword, a secret that could tear the North asunder if revealed at the wrong moment. Yet if it offered any glimmer of hope to save Sansa, no, he scolded himself. That path would lead to madness. He was no rightful king. He was a bastard with questionable Targaryen blood at best, and no real claim beyond rumor. He looked toward the main fire, where Robb stood conferring with the Great Jon and Roose Bolton, planning the next strike. They had come so far, suffered so many losses, and yet they remained dwarfed by the power of the Iron Throne. The only advantage was that the Lannisters were at war on multiple fronts, with Stannis Baratheon at Dragonstone and Renly Baratheon at Highgarden each claiming the throne. The realm was fracturing, and in that chaos, House Stark struggled to save itself. Perhaps that was all that truly mattered now. Jon's thoughts circled back to the vow he had broken, the vow to the Night's Watch, meant to guard the realm against threats beyond the wall. He felt a pang of worry for his black brothers, left behind. Mormont, Sam, PYP, Gren, he had abandoned them. The others might be stirring, and winter was coming. Yet here he was, embroiled in a southern war. Was he placing personal loyalties over the entire realm's safety? He closed his eyes, trying to push the guilt away. A single man could only do so much. Ned Stark's memory demanded justice, and he had chosen that path. He woke the next morning to a swirl of new rumors. Some men whispered that the bastard of Winterfell was a Targaryen spawn, carrying dragon's blood. Jon's stomach lurched. It had begun. He overheard them as they marched, crouching low in conversation, glancing sidelong at him. The name Black Wolf took a new color, with some calling him Wolf Dragon. The talk was half laughter, half nervous speculation. He kept his head down, ignoring it. But he saw how the men parted just a little more when he passed, uncertain what to make of him. The lords might dismiss it as idle gossip, but gossip was poison in times like these. The next day, Robb summoned Jon to his tent. The king's face was grim, flanked by Roose Bolton and the Grey Jon. The moment Jon entered, tension crackled. Robb's eyes searched Jon's face, seeking an explanation or a confession. "You've heard the rumors," Robb said flatly. Jon nodded, swallowing. "I have. I don't know how they started. They're not true." A lie, or perhaps a half-lie, for Jon himself did not know if the rumor was entirely false. Roose Bolton studied him with unsettling calm. "Some men claim you carry the blood of Rhaegar Targaryen, that your mother was Lyanna Stark." Jon stiffened. "I have no proof of that, my lord." "But do you deny it?" Bolton pressed, voice soft as silk. Jon's heart pounded. "I am Eddard Stark's bastard. That is all I know." The Great Jon rumbled, "And we have more pressing matters than chasing old tales. If it were true, what difference does it make? He's a Stark by blood anyway." Bolton's lips curved in a thin smile. "If it were true, it might mean everything, Lord Umber. The line of Targaryen kings, though deposed, still carries weight in certain minds. And if the king in the north has among his camp a man who might stake a claim to the Iron Throne, that might complicate our campaign immeasurably." Jon's anger flared. "I have no desire for a throne, any throne. I came here to fight for Robb, not challenge him." Robb looked at Jon with a quiet intensity. "I believe you. But the rumor is growing. Mother has heard it too. She demanded I address it swiftly." He drew a heavy breath. "Jon, I must ask you plainly, did father ever reveal anything about your mother that might suggest that you're not his natural bastard?" Jon shook his head. "He never told me anything. He swore to me we would talk about it one day, but that day never came." Robb's shoulders slumped in relief or disappointment, perhaps both. "Then so be it. We declare to all that you are my half-brother, of Stark blood and no more. If the rumor persists, I will treat it as treacherous talk meant to sow division. I'll have any man who persists in it flogged." His eyes shifted to Bolton. "Is that acceptable?" Bolton dipped his head. "You are king, your grace. I obey." The Grey Jon let out a snort of approval. "We have bigger wolves to hunt than gossip. Tywin Lannister is out there gathering strength. Let the bastard be. He's proven himself in battle." Robb stood, placing a firm hand on Jon's shoulder. "I will not have this rumor tear us apart. Let it end here. Do you understand, Jon?" Jon nodded, swallowing bitterness. "I do, your grace." And so, with that pronouncement, the king in the north sought to bury the rumor, to quell any spark that might fan a rift. Yet, like so many things in war, secrets refused to die so easily. The men still whispered in hushed tones. R plus L equals J, some repeated as though it were a charm or a curse. Every day, Jon wondered if the rumor might warp into open challenges against Robb, if some lords might consider switching allegiances, believing that a Targaryen Stark bastard could unify the realm better than a young, untested king. Others dismissed it outright. But seeds had been planted, and seeds, once planted, often find a way to grow. Within days, new ravens arrived, bringing tidings that changed the shape of the war. Balon Greyjoy had crowned himself king of the Iron Islands and launched raids on the North's western coasts. Winterfell was threatened. Robb, forced to choose between pressing south to rescue Sansa and protecting his homeland, was thrown into turmoil. The lords argued fiercely. Lady Catelyn, returning once more, wept at the thought of leaving Sansa in the Lannisters' clutches, but as a proud Tully and Stark, she recognized the threat to Winterfell as well. In the swirling chaos of those councils, Jon saw how the North was fracturing under multiple threats. Some lords insisted that the real war was in the south, that they must keep the pressure on the Lannisters. Others argued that if Winterfell fell to the Ironborn, the entire northern campaign was undone. All looked to Robb. And Robb, weary with the burden of kingship, finally made the call. Part of the army would return north to defend the homeland while the rest would remain with him, forging alliances in the Riverlands to press south in hopes of freeing Sansa. He intended to split his forces, a dangerous move by any measure. Then came the question of who would lead the northern force. Many expected Roose Bolton would assume that role, but Boltons had never been beloved and their reputation for cruelty stirred unease. Lord Manderley had the will but not the immediate manpower. The Great Jon was loyal but hot-headed. They argued deep into the night. Robb was determined to remain in the south, for he believed that a chance to save Sansa demanded his presence. In the midst of that heated debate, Lady Catelyn, her eyes rimmed with tears, spoke a name that caused silence to fall. Why not Jon Snow? A hush swallowed the tent. Jon froze in shock. Lady Catelyn swallowed, forging on. He has proven himself in battle. The men respect his blade. And though he is a bastard, he was raised in Winterfell. He knows our land, our people. If Ned were here, her voice broke and she steadied it. He would want his blood defending our seat. We can debate rumors all we want, but the men see him as a Stark, if not in name. Who better to lead a contingent home, to hold our fortress, to guard our younger sons? Robb was speechless, clearly blindsided by his mother's words. So was Jon. The Great Jon's eyebrows shot up. Roose Bolton's eyes narrowed, though he said nothing. At last, Robb found his voice. Mother, you once demanded I cast Jon out. She looked at Jon with a complex swirl of emotions. I still have my misgivings, she said quietly. But these are desperate times and he is your brother. Ned would have trusted him to guard Winterfell. She turned away, blinking rapidly. Perhaps old resentments lingered in her heart, but she placed the realm's needs above them now. If we must split our forces, we must entrust Winterfell to a man of Stark blood. Robb swallowed. Silence reigned. The lords stared, measuring Jon. He felt their gazes, heavy as millstones. Then Robb turned to his council. Lord Bolton, do you object? Bolton measured Jon with cold eyes. If that is your wish, your grace. The bastard is skilled. Yet, the matter of leadership might raise eyebrows among certain lords. Would they follow a deserter? Lady Catelyn's voice was sharp. They will follow who the king commands if they are truly loyal. She raised her chin. Jon Snow is the best we have for this task. Would you prefer the Ironborn take Winterfell? Bolton inclined his head slightly. The Great Jon let out a grunt of approval. I say let him do it. The boy fights well and knows Winterfell's ways. I'll back him. All eyes turned to Jon. His heart pounded. This was an unexpected turn, and fear warred with pride. To guard Winterfell, to protect Bran and Rickon, to keep the seat of House Stark safe, was that not an honor beyond measure for a bastard? Yet the cost would be leaving Robb and the war for Sansa. It also carried heavy risk. If the Ironborn overcame them, Winterfell could fall and Jon would be remembered as the one who lost the Stark seat. He also felt a pang of guilt about the vow he had once made to defend the realm, not a castle. But that vow had been abandoned long ago. Now his vow was to House Stark. Robb's voice broke teeth. Hush. Jon, will you do this? Jon locked eyes with his brother, the king in the north. If that is your command, your grace, I will go. Winterfell is my home if it's any home. I'll defend it or die in the attempt. A flicker of relief or gratitude showed in Robb's tired face. Then it is decided. He turned to the lords. Lord Bolton, you will remain with me, as will the Great Jon. Lord Manderley, gather your men if you can, but if the Ironborn threaten your shores, coordinate with Jon. I name Jon Snow as Castellan of Winterfell in my stead, with all powers to hold the seat and protect my brothers." His voice carried the ring of finality. "So I command." And so, in a twist no one could have foreseen, when Jon Snow first arrived, he was entrusted with the defense of the ancient Stark stronghold. The next day, preparations were underway to send him north with a sizable force, though not as large as he might wish. The war needed most of Robb's men in the south. Jon took each new responsibility with a sober determination. He was no lord, no rightful heir, but he was Ned Stark's blood, and Winterfell was the only real home he had ever known. If defending it meant shouldering the burdens of leadership, he would do so. Before he departed, Robb and Jon stood near the edge of camp, next to their respective horses. Grey Wind and Ghost sniffed each other with a hint of tension, as though sensing the changing tides. Robb placed a hand on Jon's shoulder. "Take care of Bran and Rickon," he said, voice thick. "They need family around them." Jon dipped his head. "I will. And you, be careful in the south. If anything can be done for Sansa," his voice trailed off, shame coiling at the thought of leaving her in danger. "I'll do all I can." Robb's eyes glistened. He paused, then pulled Jon into a brief embrace. "You are my brother," he whispered, quiet but fierce. "No rumor can change that. Farewell." Jon swallowed the lump in his throat. "Farewell, Your Grace." With that, Jon swung onto his horse. A company of Northmen, some 2,000 strong, formed ranks behind him, volunteers and men assigned to guard the seat of House Stark. Jon felt unworthy of leading them, but he held his head high. Somewhere amid them rode a few minor lords, like the young Lord Serwyn, men who had grown up near Winterfell and remembered Jon sparring in the courtyard. They regarded him with cautious respect, and it gave him strength. At least they didn't seem to scorn him as a deserter now. Not when he was tasked with protecting their own lands and families. As they set out upon the road north, a hush fell. The weight of destiny pressed on Jon's shoulders. He recalled the letter from Maester Luwin, the rumor of his parentage. If he ever were to stand in a place of power, it was now, riding at the head of men sworn to House Stark. He felt a swirl of loyalty and fear. If the Ironborn came, if Balon Greyjoy sent his reavers to seize Winterfell, Jon would face them, longclaw in hand, with these men at his side. He might die. But perhaps that was the price of duty. This was the path he had chosen when he left the Night's Watch behind, forging a new destiny in the chaos of Ned Stark's death. He glanced at the men following in a ragged line of dust. Perhaps he was no rightful king, or even a rightful lord, but for the moment he commanded them. He owed them victory, or at least the best defense he could muster. The road stretched on, leading him back to the seat of his childhood, back to the wide halls and the godwood that had once given him solace. And in his heart, despite the fear, despite the heavy gloom of war, a spark of hope flickered. He was Jon Snow, a Stark bastard by name, a potential Targaryen by rumor, but above all, a man determined to do his duty. Ned Stark's blood ran in his veins. And though the North was divided, though the war threatened to break them all, Jon felt he was at last stepping onto the ground he was meant to walk. A protector of Winterfell, a guardian of the young wolves. Whether or not that choice would lead to redemption or ruin remained to be seen. The wind sighed across the fields as the column marched, the trees whispering of the winter to come. Far behind, Robb Stark's banner still flew, the direwolf snapping in the southern breeze. Far beyond, somewhere in the heart of King's Landing, Sansa's fate hung in the balance, and the Lannisters plotted. The realm was a tapestry of strife and secrets, each threat tugging at the fragile threads of unity. Jon Snow tightened his grip on the reins, steel in his eyes. He rode onward, determined, into the gathering dusk, carrying the North's last hope, divided though it might be, upon his shoulders. And with every hoofbeat, he reminded himself, I am no king, only a bastard. But sometimes a bastard is all the North needs. Jon Snow's company pressed north along the King's Road, a ragged column of 2,000 souls clinging to the margins of autumn. The air sharpened as each league fell behind them, the nights stretching longer and colder. Leafless branches rattled overhead, and crows filled the silence with harsh cries. Ghost padded ahead, ghost pale muzzle sniffing fallen leaves that still carried the scent of distant war. Where once his senses might have been lulled by the familiarity of these woods, Jon felt no peace now, only the relentless churn of worry that threatened to drown him in doubts. He glanced at his men. Some, like young Lord Serwyn, tried to look confident, to hide their unease behind stoic faces. Others wore their fear openly, unable to disguise the tremor in their hands or the dart of their eyes whenever the wind hissed through the pines. They were all painfully aware of their mission, to defend Winterfell from the Ironborn. Even the small folk among them, those who had latched onto the column for protection, seemed to sense the magnitude of that burden. The black and gray swirling together, bastard and banner, had become an unlikely symbol of hope, or perhaps only the last desperate option. Late in the afternoon, they made camp near an old watchtower, a remnant of some ancient conflict. With dusk creeping across the sky, Jon picked the spot carefully, selecting higher ground and ordering makeshift defenses. His position as commander still sat uneasily on his shoulders. He oversaw the men building small fires, establishing sentries, and distributing rations. The old watchtower was little more than a collapsed shell, its upper floors broken, but it stood near a stream, a passable water source. They'd been lucky with forage so far, but the further north they rode, the scarcer fresh supplies would become, especially if the Ironborn threatened to cut trade routes. Already, the occasional rumor drifted in of raiders striking at fishing villages along the stony shore. The fear was that they'd soon push inward. When the small fires dotted the camp, their flames dancing fitfully in the wind, Jon took a moment to walk its perimeter. He paused beside one of the watchmen, a man with a bushy beard and a fur cloak mended thrice over. The watchman saluted in a way that suggested he had once drilled in some lord's service but had grown older and stiffer. They shared a curt nod. At times, the men's respect was more grudging than true devotion. They had followed Robb Stark's command, not necessarily Jon Snow's. Some still bristled at the notion of a deserter set to guard Winterfell. Jon felt the unspoken question simmering in their eyes. Wasn't he the one who turned his back on one sacred vow? Why should they trust him to keep this new one? To quell such doubts, he led by example, never shirking the tasks others might leave to subordinates. He helped dig latrines, hauled water, and personally patrolled the outskirts. It was not just a performance. It was who he was, or at least who he strove to be. He remembered Ned Stark's lessons. The man who passes the sentence should swing the sword. Authority was not a trophy to parade, but a duty to shoulder. As night set in, he settled near the largest of the campfires. A half-moon glimmered above, wreathing the watchtower's broken stones in pale light. Ghost curled beside him in the dirt, soft ears pricked for any threat. Around them, men conversed in hushed murmurs, some poking at the embers with sticks, others passing mead from battered skins. Lord Serwyn, slender, perhaps 16, with a faint fuzz of gold at his cheeks, arrived and dipped his head to Jon. "My lord," Serwyn said, voice quavering with the remnants of the day's chill. Jon winced inwardly at the title. He was no lord, but he let it pass. "Is something amiss?" Serwyn shook his head, lowering himself onto a log. "No, I just wondered if you might speak with me about the strategy for tomorrow's march. The men could use some reassurance. We push hard each day, but how close are we to Winterfell now?" Jon raked a hand through his hair. "Closer than we were yesterday," he said, managing a thin smile. "We're maybe 5 days from the castle, if the roads are clear and the weather stays kind. As for reassurance, we must keep moving as fast as we can, but not so fast that we arrive exhausted. The Ironborn are known for striking from the coastline, so perhaps we have some time before they march inland." Serwyn's expression tightened. "My father always said the Ironborn never hesitate to exploit any weakness. I hear they've attacked Deepwood Motte already." His voice carried the tremor of rumor. Jon's heart sank. "I haven't received direct word of that yet. We know they've landed men near the stony shore, but the rest is speculation." Indeed, no ravens had reached them with confirmed news of an assault on Deepwood Motte. But the Ironborn's cunning was not to be dismissed. Serwyn looked into the fire, his shoulders slumping. "I just want to reach Winterfell quickly. My mother is there, along with my younger sisters. She evacuated the Serwyn Keep when the roads became unsafe. She wrote to me that the safest place was behind Winterfell's walls." Jon understood that fear well. "I know. We'll do everything we can to ensure they're safe. If Balon Greyjoy has truly sent his reavers, we'll face them at Winterfell or drive them back to the sea." Serwyn managed a small nod, though his eyes remained troubled. With a sigh, he made his excuses and left to speak with some men from his own household. Jon lingered by the fire a moment longer, feeling the weight of their collective fear pressing in. He had never led an army, never held a keep. He was a bastard, once a brother of the Watch. Now he was expected to be a castellan in all but name. The thought churned in his gut. Eventually he rose. Ghost padded after him. He found a sliver of solace near a narrow stream just outside camp. Kneeling, he splashed cold water on his face, letting the chill shock him from his endless doubts. He gazed at his own reflection lit by moonlight and glimpsed a man who looked older than he had weeks ago. Tension carved lines at the corners of his eyes. He thought of the rumor that dogged him, the swirling whisper that he might be Rhaegar Targaryen's son, some half-dragon, half-wolf creation. The absurdity of it nearly made him laugh, but no humor surfaced. If the rumor gained traction in the north, or if the Ironborn learned there was any unrest among the Starks, it would invite chaos. He could not allow that. And so he forced himself to push the possibility aside, as Ned Stark had apparently done all Jon's life. Returning to the camp, he ducked into his small command tent, though it was hardly more than a larger swath of canvas staked against the wind. He had no desire for comfort. His bedroll was laid atop a straw mattress, and that was enough. He let Ghost slip inside, took off his boots, and tried to rest. Sleep was fitful at best. They set off again at dawn, the men grumbling at the early call but obeying all the same. The road wove through thick stands of pine, the canopy thinning out to reveal the wide skies of the north. Twice they passed small hamlets, their residents perched on the edges of fear. The half-burned remains of a cottage, the smell of charred wood lingering, told of roving bandits or perhaps outlaws. Balon Greyjoy was not the only threat. War begot war, and with the king in the north away, lawlessness thrived. Jon's presence with soldiers offered a measure of protection, and the small folk sometimes approached, pleading for help or offering what little they had in gratitude. A barrel of salted fish, a bag of turnips. Jon accepted the gifts humbly, promising to do what he could, though he knew their safety was not guaranteed. Near midday, a scout returned, breathless. "My lord, riders ahead, 3, maybe 4. Could be bandits or outriders from some lord's band. They're armed, but they haven't attacked. They just watch from a rise, then vanish into the trees." Jon nodded, frowning. "We'll be cautious, place an extra guard on the rear, and ensure our flanks are covered." They pressed on, the tension in the column palpable. Jon assigned a dozen archers to keep watch for ambush. But as the day wore on, no attack came. Instead, at dusk, a lone rider emerged onto the road, cloak flapping in the wind. Jon's men raised spears, but he held up empty hands in a sign of peace. He was a tall man with graying hair and a battered sigil on his breast. House Hornwood, if Jon wasn't mistaken. The man dismounted and bowed stiffly. "My lord, I come from Lord Manderly's men. They ride behind me, bringing news and men to join your cause," he said. "They sent me ahead to warn you of possible Ironborn raiders along the White Knife." Jon let out a soft breath of relief. Lord Wyman Manderly had pledged to coordinate with him, as Robb had ordered. Reinforcements from White Harbor could shift the odds if the Ironborn tried a direct assault on Winterfell. Still, Jon's relief was tempered by caution. "How many come?" "About 600 men, cavalry mostly. They travel at pace, but the roads are muddy. They'll be here in 3, maybe 4 days. Lord Manderly is behind them yet, rallying more if he can. He's uneasy about the threat to White Harbor itself, so he cannot commit all his strength." That was understandable. With the seas in turmoil, White Harbor's coasts were hardly safe from Ironborn longships. "Good," Jon said. "We welcome them. We'll be at Winterfell ourselves within 5 days, if all goes to plan. They can meet us there or on the road if timing aligns." The messenger nodded. "Aye, my lord. I'll rest with you tonight and ride back at first light to inform the cavalry of your whereabouts." So it was that a small, unexpected hope appeared. With Manderly's men and the strength Jon already carried, they might stand a chance against the Ironborn, provided they coordinated swiftly. He offered the messenger a place by the fires and a portion of their meager stew. The man ate gratefully, confirming some rumors. The Ironborn were indeed marauding along the northern coasts, but the details were scattered. He hadn't heard of any large force marching on Winterfell yet, but that was no guarantee the Reavers wouldn't pivot inland soon. Throughout that evening, the men shared quieter, more hopeful talk, buoyed by the thought of reinforcements. As for Jon, he wrestled with mixed emotions. Reinforcements would help him defend Winterfell, but what if the Ironborn had already sent a stealthier group forward? What if they intended to take the castle by trickery, or incite local lords to rebellion by playing on rumors of a Targaryen connection? It seemed impossible, but in these times the wildest rumor could become a weapon. He tried to push such fears aside and focus on the tangible. The next morning, he drove the company onward at a steady march, pausing only when necessary. They lodged one night near a deserted mill, the walls half collapsed, the water wheel broken. There, the wind howled like a living creature, and men huddled closer to the fires. By the next noon, the silhouette of the first lake shimmered in the distance. The route angled around the water, and from there, it was no more than 2 days to Winterfell, assuming no complications. But complications arose. Late that afternoon, as they navigated a stretch of narrow road flanked by stands of old pines, a distant horn blared. Jon's head jerked up. Another horn answered, a shrill, eerie call echoing through the trees. The column stumbled to a halt. Men gripped spears and shields, scanning the forest. Ghost let out a low, rumbling growl, hackles raised. Form ranks. Jon barked. He could not see any threat, but the horns suggested watchers. The sound had come from behind the tree line, as if scouting or signaling. He spurred his horse forward, flanked by a dozen riders. They picked their way through the pines until the undergrowth thinned enough to reveal a group of men about 100 yards away. Some wore scraps of armor, others simple leather jerkins. Their sigils, if they had any, were hidden or absent. At first, Jon thought them bandits. But then he noticed a flicker of gray on one man's shield, a partial marking that might have been a dire wolf once. Deserters from the Stark cause? Or perhaps Sellswords? The strangers made no move to charge, but they stood in a loose formation, bows at the ready. One man, scarred across the jaw, stepped forward. Halt! We want no trouble, but we'll defend ourselves if need be. Jon reined in. Who are you? Men of House Slate, the scarred man said, though he spoke the name uncertainly. House Slate was a lesser house sworn to the Starks, if Jon remembered rightly, dwelling near the rills. We were forced from our lands by ire-born raiders. Our lord is dead, or so we think. The Reavers burned us out. We took to the forest for safety. Jon exchanged a glance with the riders at his back. If these men had indeed lost their holdfast to the Ironborn, they might be telling the truth. Or they could be brigands wearing a story like a disguise. If you serve House Stark, then why lurk here? Why not join the northern host or seek refuge in Winterfell? The scarred man spat into the dirt. We tried, but rovers are everywhere. Our band was attacked more than once on the road. Our numbers whittled away. We fear for our kin, for the north. Heard rumors the bastard of Winterfell. He trailed off, eyeing Jon's black cloak. Are you him? Jon's mouth tightened, so the rumors preceded him still. I am Jon Snow, charged by King Robb Stark to defend Winterfell. He forced his voice to be steady. If you are truly loyal, lay down your arms and come with me. We can't afford to be skulking in the woods. Winterfell needs every blade. Some of the men whispered among themselves, tension evident. Finally, the scarred man said, I lost everything, my lord. My family's holdfast is ash. If you can promise a chance to strike back at the Ironborn, we'll follow. Jon let out a breath. I promise no easy victories. But yes, we mean to drive the Ironborn back into the sea. The man nodded, lowering his weapon. Behind him, the others did the same, albeit warily. Their group numbered perhaps 40, ragged and hungry, but hardened by desperation. Jon brought them into the main column, distributing what rations they could spare. As they marched on, he gleaned more details of the Ironborn's raids. Tales of a warship off the coast at the Rills, reavers torching farmsteads, carrying off any women unfortunate enough to fall into their grasp. A cold fury kindled in Jon's gut, fueling his resolve to defend Winterfell and protect the realm he'd once sworn to guard, albeit from a different vantage. That night, as they made camp by a shallow creek, the new arrivals told their stories by firelight. The old holdfast of House Slate had been attacked under cover of darkness. They had posted watchmen, but the reavers slipped in from the river using small boats. A pitched battle followed, but the Slates were outnumbered. They tried to hold out until help arrived, but none came. The Ironborn, led by a fearsome woman tall, with short dark hair, wearing mismatched iron plate, cut through them. Some recognized her as one of Balon Greyjoy's kin, though they weren't sure if it was Asha Greyjoy or another woman. The descriptions varied, but the terror was consistent. Jon listened grimly. He remembered Theon Greyjoy, who had been a ward of Eddard Stark at Winterfell, joking and strutting about with that cocky grin. Now, Theon might be with his father, possibly leading the assault on his former home. A sense of betrayal curled through Jon. He had never been close to Theon, but they'd grown up in the same corridors. To think that Theon might help the Ironborn lay claim to the north, it struck him as a deep wound. He pushed the thought away. Whether Theon was among them or not, the Ironborn were a threat. That was enough. Morning arrived in the hush of weak sunlight. They had no time to linger. Tired limbs complained, but Jon drove them to break camp early once more. The forest began to thin, replaced by rolling plains. They glimpsed the ancient barrow mounds in the distance, ghostly humps on the horizon. Another day, perhaps, to Winterfell's gates. Anxiety built in every passing hour, gnawing at Jon. He prayed to the old gods that they would arrive before the Ironborn, but he had no certainty. Near midday, they spotted smoke, a faint plume rising to the east, miles away. The column slowed. Jon signaled a scout forward, a lanky man from House Serwyn who was skilled at reading sign. The scout galloped off with 2 companions, promising a quick return. They came back within the hour, faces grim. "Bandits or reavers, my lord," the scout said. "They sacked a small village near the meandering stream. We found bodies." Could be the Ironborn or some other group of raiders. Hard to tell. They left no banner. Jon's jaw clenched. Another blow to the north. But to deviate and chase these marauders might cost them precious time. Winterfell was their true objective. If the Reavers had enough force to besiege the castle, or if they intended to capture it quietly, every delay put Bran and Rickon, indeed, all within the castle, in grave danger. Yet ignoring the plight of these villages tore at Jon's conscience. He remembered Ned Stark's words, he who would be a good lord must protect his small folk as well as his knights. But Ned had never faced a two-front crisis like this. Not quite. After a moment's hesitation, Jon gave orders for a small detachment, 50 horsemen led by Lord Serwyn, to ride out, confirm if the raiders were Ironborn, and drive them off if possible. They'd regroup with Jon at Winterfell once the threat was assessed. Serwyn, though young, nodded solemnly. He had grown more certain of himself these last days, and the knowledge that his family waited in the safety of Winterfell spurred him on. While Serwyn's detachment veered east, Jon led the main body onward. The hours stretched, the men trudging under a sky bruised by gathering clouds. By late afternoon, the farmland near Winterfell finally came into view. Jon felt a wave of relief at the sight of the gentle slope leading toward the great castle. Smoke from the chimneys curled upward, peaceful and familiar. The silhouette of the ancient walls, towers, and the broken tower of the first keep brought back memories of childhood, running across the yard with Robb, Theon, and the younger stable boys, chasing each other with wooden swords. In those days, he'd felt like an outsider in the castle, yet still welcomed by Ned Stark. Now he returned not as an outcast, but as the man charged to protect it. As they drew closer, the gates swung open. A handful of guards in Stark livery stepped forward, eyes wide at the size of Jon's column. One recognized him immediately, Darren, a guard who had once teased Jon for practicing archery in the courtyard with a two-stiff bow. Now the man bowed quickly, breath puffing white in the cold air. "My lord," Darren said, "the castle stands ready to receive you." Jon nodded in thanks. "How fare Bran and Rickon?" Darren looked relieved. "They are well, or as well as can be. They'll be glad to see you, my lord. Maester Luwin and Ser Roderick have kept order, though times are tense. Rumors come in daily about raids on the western coasts. We've had no direct sign of Ironborn this far inland yet." Jon's tension eased a fraction. "Good. Let's get inside and secure the gates. We expect more men soon. Manderly's cavalry and possibly a detachment from House Serwyn. They must be admitted without trouble." The gates groaned shut behind them once the last of Jon's men filed into the courtyard. Wagons rumbled in carrying supplies. The yard was bustling with activity, and Winterfell's stewards rushed to find stables for the horses, space for the new arrivals. In the swirl of it all, Jon dismounted, heart pounding as he set foot on the familiar cobblestones. A swirl of memories threatened to overwhelm him. Ser Roderick Castle stepped forward, leaning on his cane. Age and sorrow had etched new lines on his face since Jon last saw him. "Jon Snow," he greeted, voice gentle yet formal. "Your arrival is timely indeed. Winterfell's walls may still be strong, but each new rumor of Ironborn spurs fear. We are glad you've come." Jon bowed his head, feeling a flush of respect for the old master-at-arms who once taught him to hold a sword. "Ser Roderick, I wish the circumstances were happier." The old knight's face softened. "We have endured worse, I suppose. Let us see that we endure again." A rustle of movement brought Maester Luwin into view. He bustled over, scrolls clutched to his chest, relief plain in his eyes. "Jon, Forgive me, Castellan Snow? Or is it Lord Snow? He caught himself in the swirl of titles. Flustered. It is good you've arrived. King Robb wrote that you would come, but we received no raven to mark your progress until just recently. We've been worried. Jon offered a thin smile. Simply call me Jon. No need for a lord style. I'm no lord. Luwin nodded, clearly grateful for the clarity. Very well, Jon. You must see Bran and Rickon, yes? Jon's chest squeezed with an unfamiliar ache. Of course. Let on. Let me first instruct the men where to quarter. We'll set up a rotation to keep watch on the walls. No one is to be let in or out without my leave. We have to be vigilant. Ser Rodrik bowed. As you say, I'll organize the watch rotation. The men can quarter in the Great Hall as needed, though we have to be mindful of supplies. Maester Luwin and I have done what we can, but Winterfell was not prepared for a large influx of soldiers. We've stockpiled as best we can. Jon noted the caution in Roderick's tone. We'll figure it out. I'll meet you in the solar after I see my brothers. He handed his reins to a stable boy who gawked in awe at Ghost. The dire wolf was bigger now than he had been the last time he roamed these courtyards, easily dwarfing the regular hounds. Ghost's silent presence unnerved many, but they parted for him without protest. Jon followed Maester Luwin through a side entrance, into the corridors of Winterfell. The stone walls closed around him, warm compared to the chill outside. Old torches flickered, casting wavering shadows. The smell of old rushes, smoke, and a hint of stew from the kitchens assaulted Jon's senses, stirring countless recollections. He passed rooms he had known as a child, the armory, the library, the old practice yard. Each footstep sounded too loud, like a ghost returning uninvited. At last, they climbed the winding steps to the solar. Maester Luwin pushed open a door, revealing the cozy chamber with tapestries depicting Stark heroes and scenes of the North's wild beauty. The windows let in milky light from the overcast sky. And there, near the hearth, sat Bran in a chair built to accommodate his legs, which had been injured when he fell from the tower. Rickon was at his side, fidgeting. Shaggy Dog lay sprawled near Rickon's feet, eyes gleaming green in the firelight. Summer, Bran's wolf, was not in sight, likely roaming the castle. Bran's face lit up the moment he spotted Jon. "Jon," he cried, voice cracking with a mixture of surprise and relief. "You're here." Rickon scrambled to his feet, face screwing up as if he might cry or shout or both. "Jon," he echoed, rushing forward. Shaggy Dog shot up, baring teeth at Ghost, but Rickon seized the wolf's scruff. The tension between dire wolves bristled until Jon spoke softly, "Ghost, easy." The white wolf backed away a step, watchful. Jon crouched, arms outstretched. Rickon collided with him in a rough hug, burying his face against Jon's chest. Bran gazed from his chair, expression caught between joy and sadness. Jon rose, guiding Rickon forward so they could all see each other better. "You both look bigger," Jon said, trying for levity. "Especially you, Rickon." Rickon sniffed, blinking rapidly. "I missed you. I thought you'd never come back." Jon ruffled Rickon's hair gently. "I'm here now." Bran's voice was subdued. Mother and Robb both left, one after the other. Winterfell felt empty. Maester Luwin tried to tell me we'd be safe, but with all the talk of war, it didn't feel safe at all. Jon walked to Bran's side, clasping his shoulder. "I'm sorry you had to endure that. It's been hard for everyone. But I'm here now, and I'll do my best to protect Winterfell. And you both." He noted how thin Bran looked, how the burdens of recent events weighed on him. Bran reached up and grabbed Jon's forearm. "You're not with the Night's Watch anymore?" He glanced at Jon's attire, part black, part northern leathers. Jon forced a small smile. "No, I left." He hesitated, deciding how much detail to share with a boy who had already been through too much. "There were reasons. Robb and I, well, we both want to keep the family safe. So I came north to guard Winterfell." Rickon looked up with wide eyes. "Are the Ironborn coming? Is that why you're here?" Jon paused, exchanging a look with Maester Luwin. "There's a chance, but we have strong walls and good men. If the Ironborn try, we'll repel them. I need you both to stay close to the Maester and Ser Rodrik. Do as they tell you." "Agreed." Bran nodded solemnly, the weight of new responsibility etched in his features. "I'll do whatever is necessary. I've been studying, reading about the Lords of the North. Maester Luwin says it helps keep my mind sharp. A faint flicker of pride appeared in Bran's eyes, but it was tinged with sorrow at the memory of his own lost mobility. Jon's throat felt tight. He remembered the lively boy who had once dreamed of knighthood, climbing towers with an easy grin. Now Bran was forced to watch others stand while he Saturday. "You'll make a fine keeper of knowledge for Winterfell," Jon said gently. "And I suspect you'll find your own path, too." Rickon tugged at Jon's sleeve, voice quavering. "Can I help fight if the Ironborn come? I'm strong enough." Shaggy Dog bared teeth, as if to emphasize Rickon's eagerness. Jon shook his head carefully. "You're too young for the battlefield, but you can help by staying safe so the men can focus on the fight." "All right." Rickon scowled, but he nodded reluctantly. Jon smoothed a hand over Rickon's wild hair. The boy's face was thin, as though the turmoil had stolen some of his childhood. The stark reality of war weighed on them all. Maester Luwin cleared his throat softly. "I'll give you a moment. But I should mention that we have a war council of sorts. The leading men who remained here, some from minor houses, wish to speak with you, Jon, about the defense of Winterfell." Jon acknowledged him. "Yes, I'll see them soon. Just let me stay here a bit longer." The maester bowed and departed, leaving the three of them, for, if the anxious dire wolf Shaggy Dog were counted, in a pocket of quiet. Jon let out a long breath, kneeling beside Bran's chair. He spoke low, voice steady. "Bran, do you feel safe here? Are the guards loyal? Is there any tension I should know about?" Bran frowned. "The guards are loyal as far as I can tell. Ser Roderick keeps a close eye. There was a small argument weeks ago between some men who wanted to ride south to join Robb, but he convinced them to stay. Mostly, people worry about the Ironborn or bandits. Winterfell has been the seat of House Stark for thousands of years. No one wants it to fall into enemy hands." "And you?" Jon asked. Bran looked away. "I do my best, but I'm not father or Robb. The men can see I'm just a crippled boy even if I wear the Stark name." "Don't say that," Jon said, voice edged with quiet intensity. "You're their liege lord's son, and you deserve respect. You have a wise mind, Bran. That counts for more than swords sometimes. If you sense any unrest, come to me or Maester Luwin or Ser Roderick. We stand together." Bran swallowed, nodding. Rickon shifted at Jon's side, fiddling with the hem of his tunic. Jon placed a hand on Rickon's back, an unexpected surge of protectiveness flooding him. It was a role he never imagined for himself, caretaker of younger Stark heirs. But the memory of Ned's calm presence spurred him on. Someone must stand in his stead. Eventually, Jon rose, aware that duties pressed upon him. "I must meet with the men. But I'll see you soon. Keep Summer and Shaggy Dog close. If anything strange happens, stay in the Great Keep with your dire wolves." "Understood." Bran dipped his head. Rickon nodded, though his lower lip quivered. With a final gentle squeeze of Rickon's shoulder, Jon left them, Ghost padding by his side. The corridor outside felt colder, and he realized how weary he was from days of hard travel and weeks of tension. Back in the Great Hall, Maester Luwin, Ser Roderick, and a handful of lesser lords awaited. Lord Harclay, an aging man with shaky hands, Lady Donella Hornwood's steward who had come in her stead since Lady Hornwood's fortunes were uncertain, a representative from House Tallheart, and a few others. They were all local powers, the kind who might muster an extra dozen or 100 men in times of crisis. Their faces reflected hope and wariness as Jon approached. He settled at the head of the high table, the seat once reserved for the Lord of Winterfell. It felt strange, almost sacrilegious. But the men had insisted on it, for he was named the Castellan by the king in the north. Ghost lay at his feet, watchful. A hush fell. Ser Roderick spoke first. "Jon, we have had no direct confrontation with the Ironborn as of yet, but the reports from the coast are worrisome. We fear they mean to cut the north in two by holding key points along the White Knife or taking Winterfell itself as a symbol. If that happens, it could sow discord among the bannermen." Jon nodded, leaning forward. "Agreed. We have to assume an attack is possible or even likely. I've brought 2,000 men, some of them from Lord Umber's domains, others from scattered houses. We also expect a Manderley cavalry force to join us soon, another 600. That will bolster our defenses. Winterfell's walls are strong, but we need to be prepared for siege or subterfuge. The Ironborn might try to slip in the way they did at House Slate." The Hornwood steward, a wiry man named Mathes, cleared his throat. "Lady Hornwood's lands have been ravaged before by such reavers. But you must know that our storehouses are not infinite. Winter may come, and with it we'll have to feed the population taking shelter here. Have you considered that if the war drags on, we'll be strained for resources? Jon exhaled. The question had haunted him from the start. Winterfell's legendary stores, hot springs, and thick walls gave them an advantage in a siege. But not if the entire north flocked here. We'll manage rationing carefully. If possible, we'll coordinate with White Harbor for shipments along the river if the path remains safe. We'll encourage local villages to maintain their own supplies and only come to Winterfell if truly threatened. As for the immediate threat, if the Ironborn strike soon, we must repel them swiftly. I doubt it will devolve into a long siege scenario, at least not at first. A tall man from House Tallheart spoke up. The Ironborn prefer lightning raids, yes, but if Theon Greyjoy, who knows Winterfell, leads them, they might have knowledge of our weaknesses. We must remain vigilant. Jon's gut twisted. The thought of Theon guiding an enemy force through hidden passages or postern gates was chilling. He said, will increase patrols around the walls and search every corner for vulnerabilities. Ser Rodrik, perhaps we can assign men to watch the postern gates night and day. Double the guard, and rotate them so no one becomes complacent. Ser Rodrik inclined his head. That I can do. Lord Harklay, voice thin with age, offered another concern. If the men become restless or fearful, discipline could falter. We rely on you to keep them focused. With rumors swirling about your background, some might question your right to command. Jon felt a prickle of anger. He forced it down. They can question my right if they wish, but I was named by King Robb Stark. That should suffice. As for rumors, they are just that. I am a Stark bastard, nothing more. If anyone stirs trouble, we'll deal with it. A flicker of disquiet passed over Harklay's face, but he did not press further. The meeting continued, discussing everything from the allotment of watch rotations to the possibility of forging large-scale Raven communications with other loyal holds. Jon found himself outlining defensive positions in Winterfell's courtyard, how archers might be placed on the walls, how the gates would be reinforced. The lords and stewards asked pointed questions, but they generally accepted his authority. By the time the gathering ended, the men dispersed in subdued unity, each departing with tasks assigned. When only Maester Luwin and Ser Rodrik remained, Jon sank into the lord's chair with a weary sigh. Ghost rested his muzzle on Jon's knee as if sensing his exhaustion. Rodrik regarded him with fatherly concern. You've done well, Jon. You carry yourself with more confidence than I recall. Jon huffed a humorless laugh. Confidence is not what I feel, Ser. Only necessity. If I don't keep my wits, the Ironborn could take this place. And I can't let that happen. The old knight nodded. None of us can. Maester Luwin tapped a scroll. I've been keeping track of our messages. We should confirm your instructions to Manderly's cavalry. Where would you have them position themselves upon arrival? Jon rubbed his temple. Have them gather in the outer courtyard if the weather allows. If they arrive while we're under attack, they must break the siege or rally with us inside the walls. We should also consider sending them to guard the White Knife Crossing if that's where the Ironborn might appear. It's a judgment call. We'll need scouts posted on all major roads. Luwin nodded, scribbling notes. Ser Rodrik pushed himself upright, leaning on his cane. I'll see to our watch rotations as you commanded. After you've had a moment's rest, perhaps you should let the men see you on the battlements, speak a few words of encouragement. They need to believe in their castellan. Jon nodded. I will. Rodrik departed with measured steps. Luwin lingered a moment, his kind eyes studying Jon. You carry a great burden, Jon. Don't let it swallow you whole. Remember, you are not alone. Jon managed a small, wry grin. Sometimes He feels like I am. But thank you, Maester. Luwin dipped his head and slipped out of the hall, leaving Jon with the crackle of fire and the silent presence of Ghost. For a long moment, Jon simply sat. The high seat of Winterfell felt too large beneath him, as though he borrowed a mantle meant for someone else. Perhaps for Robb. Or Ned Stark, gone now. The memory of Ned's final hours haunted him, executed for a crime he never committed. A flicker of anger at the Lannisters rekindled in Jon's chest. He thought of Sansa in King's Landing, at Joffrey's mercy, of Arya lost or escaped somewhere. He hoped Robb could do something, anything, to save them. Meanwhile, Jon had to keep Winterfell standing. He had no illusions of a simple fight. The Ironborn would test every seam of their defenses, and if the rumors about his birth sowed division among his men, it could tear them apart from within. Eventually he rose. The afternoon light slanted through the windows, painting dust motes in gold. He made his way outside, crossing the yard. He paused to speak with some new arrivals from the columns, directing them to the best spots to shelter. Finally, he climbed the inner steps that led to the battlements. There, from the top of Winterfell's walls, he could see the rolling countryside stretching out, fields and wooded patches, roads leading away like strands of thread in a tapestry. In the distance, a faint shape might have been Serwyn's hold or perhaps a village. Overhead, the sky loomed pale and cold, a whisper of winter in the wind. A few guards saluted as Jon passed, their expressions curious. Jon offered them a nod. "Keep vigilant," he said. "Any sign of unusual movement, sound the alarm. We'll not be caught unaware." "Yes, M-Lord," one guard replied, and the others echoed agreement. Jon let his gaze wander over the parapets. Here, as a child, he had sometimes come to look at the wide world beyond Winterfell's walls, a world he yearned to explore because he felt he didn't belong. Now he was back, ironically more central to Winterfell's fate than ever. A memory surfaced, the day Ned Stark had caught him and Robb leaning over the ramparts, spitting to see who could make their saliva fall the farthest. Ned had told them sternly, "A wall is for defense, not for foolish games." But he'd been smiling as he said it. Jon closed his eyes briefly, letting the recollection fill him with a bittersweet ache. He turned to face the guards. They watched him with a mixture of respect and curiosity, so he raised his voice enough for all to hear. "We stand here because Winterfell has stood for thousands of years, through wars and winters uncounted. We will not be the ones to fail this castle. I know times are hard, that we face an enemy as ruthless as any. But I have fought alongside the men of the North, and I know your courage. If the Ironborn come, they will break against our walls. We will show them that the heart of the North will never bow to raiders or false kings. Keep faith, keep watch, and stand tall. Winter is coming, but we endure." A ripple of nods passed among them. One guard muttered, "The North remembers," and another echoed, "Aye, we do." It was not a rousing cheer, but it was enough for Jon to sense solidarity. He felt a flicker of gratitude that, for all their doubts about him, they recognized the name Stark even if he wore it only in part. Descending from the walls, Jon found the courtyard bustling. Men hammered boards to reinforce gates, archers tested their bows, stable hands rushed to settle the influx of horses in the already crowded stables. A few kennel masters tried to keep the hounds calm. Jon moved through the swirl, offering guidance where he could, though mostly the men seemed to know their tasks. Winterfell's natural resilience, coupled with the long history of the Stark's rule, gave them structure. Ser Rodrik was a comforting presence, walking among them with advice and corrections. The older man had taught them well. Late in the day, the sky dulled to a slate gray, and a light drizzle began, turning the yard slick with mud. Jon retreated inside, his cloak damp, intending to check on Bran and Rickon again. As he navigated the corridors, he ran into Osha, the wildling woman who had been taken into service at Winterfell after being found near the Wolfswood. She carried a bundle of firewood with surprising ease. Her eyes flicked to Jon with open curiosity, a half-smile curling her lips. "Heard you were back," she said. Her accent was lilting, shaped by the gift of the woods. "You've grown some muscle since I last saw you." Jon gave a curt nod. "I suppose so. How is your service here?" She shrugged. "Better than freezing beyond the wall. I do what's asked, keep an eye on Rickon sometimes. He's a tricky one, that pup." Jon's lips quirked in a faint smile. "He is. Keep watch over him if you can. He's restless, especially now." Osha inclined her head. Then her gaze grew distant, something solemn in her eyes. "You feel it in the wind? The chill that's creeping closer every day?" Jon nodded. "Winter approaches." "It does," Osha agreed softly, voice hinting at deeper fears. "And other things stir." She peered at Jon, as though measuring how much she could say. Finally, she shook her head and adjusted the firewood in her grip. "Just be ready, Snow." She moved on, leaving Jon unsettled. He remembered the warnings of the Watch, that the others were not myths. He had witnessed the White that tried to kill Lord Commander Mormont. That threat had not vanished. Yet here he was, tangled in a war against mortal foes, while the real doom might still brew beyond the wall. He pushed the thought away, focusing on the immediate threat of the Ironborn. A commotion in the courtyard drew Jon's attention. A horn sounded, a short, friendly blast. He hurried out to see half a dozen riders approaching in the drizzle, the sigil of House Serwyn on their shields. Lord Serwyn himself, or rather the young scion, reined in, breath steaming from his horse's nostrils. The men behind him bore marks of combat, torn cloaks, scratches on their armor. Serwyn dismounted quickly, inclining his head to Jon. "My lord, we found them. A band of about 30 raiders attacking a village. Not Ironborn, though, but some local brigands who took advantage of the chaos. We chased them off, killed a few. The rest fled into the woods. The villagers are safe for now." Jon felt simultaneous relief and weariness. Another threat in a realm riddled with them. "Well done. Did you lose any men?" Serwyn nodded, face grim. 3 dead, 2 wounded. It could have been worse. The brigands scattered quickly. We decided to rejoin you rather than pursue them blindly. Jon clapped Serwyn's shoulder. "You did right. Let's get your wounded to Maester Lewin. The rest of you, find warmth in the hall. Good work." As the men led their horses away, a stable boy rushing forward to help, Jon stepped aside, letting the courtyard swirl around him once more. Each new incident hammered home how fragile order was. The war had shaken the realm's foundation, and the north, left partially undefended while Robb fought in the south, was ripe for opportunists. That night, Jon supped in the great hall with his assembled men and lords. Huge tables groaned under simpler fare than once might have been served to the Starks, mostly barley stew, roasted turnips, salted fish. The smell of hot food filled the hall, warming spirits somewhat. Bran and Rickon sat near the high seat, though neither ate with childlike enthusiasm. Rickon kept glancing around, perhaps expecting an attack at any moment. Jon did his best to set them at ease, encouraging them to eat. At a certain point, Bran asked softly, "Jon, do you think we'll hear from Robb soon?" Jon set down his spoon, aware of the lords and men around them. "I hope so," he replied, voice low. "Ravens might come, or perhaps we'll hear tidings from travelers. But he's far in the south, fighting his own battles." Bran's mouth pressed into a thin line. I wish we could help rescue Sansa. It feels wrong sitting here while she's in danger." A pang of guilt twisted in Jon's gut. He reached out and placed a reassuring hand on Bran's forearm. "Robb is doing everything he can for her. Our duty is here, protecting Winterfell and the north so that there's still a home for Sansa to return to." Bran nodded, though the glimmer of tears in his eyes spoke of the burden he carried. Rickon sniffed, focusing on his stew. To distract them, Jon spoke of small things, the improvements to the stables, the training of new squires, the rumors of a traveling troupe that once visited White Harbor. It felt hollow, but it was all he could offer. After the meal, the men drifted off to find their bunks. Some sprawled on sleeping pallets in the hall itself, while lords and knights took up guest rooms. Jon lingered with Ser Roderick, discussing the next day's distribution of watches, when a distant horn echo interrupted them. One blast, then a second. A hush fell over those still in the hall, everyone tensing. Jon's heart jolted. Ser Roderick grasped his cane and stood with surprising speed for a man his age. An arrival, perhaps? Jon was already moving. "We'll find out." He strode to the courtyard, Roderick at his side, men scurrying behind them in alarm. The gates were partly opened and torches flared, illuminating rain-slicked cobblestones. A column of riders entered, their cloaks dripping. At the forefront rode a stocky knight with a fish crest on his helm, Manderly men. Jon's tension ebbed fractionally. The first wave of the cavalry had arrived. He met them near the stable, and the knight removed his helm, revealing a ruddy face and a wide grin. "Hail, Snow," the knight said, not unkindly. "I'm Ser Marlon Manderly, cousin to Lord Wyman. We've brought 600 men, as promised, though the roads were worse than we'd hoped." Jon inclined his head. "Well met, Ser Marlon. Welcome to Winterfell. We're grateful for your reinforcements. Did you encounter any trouble?" "Some sightings of raiders, but they scattered once they saw our numbers. We lost 1 man to a fever, but that's all. Lord Wyman is mustering more, though he'll keep some at White Harbor to defend the port. Should the sea turn truly hostile, he'll need them." Jon nodded. "Understood. Take your men inside. Find what warmth you can. The stables are near to bursting, but we'll manage. We have rations. Tomorrow we'll set up a plan to coordinate patrols." "Any news from the coast?" Marlon's grin faded. "Nothing good. The Ironborn are hitting the fishing villages hard, carrying off people and supplies. But there's no sign of a large host moving on Winterfell yet. We suspect Balon Greyjoy might test other holdfasts first." Or he might aim to hold Moat Cailin if he thinks he can challenge King Robb's forces returning north. Hard to say. Jon drew a slow breath. Moat Cailin is a possibility, yes, but Robb's in the Riverlands. They may see Winterfell as an easier symbol to seize if they want to break northern morale. In any case, your men arrived in time. We'll hold if they come. They shared a firm handshake, and Ser Marlon led his cavalrymen deeper into the courtyard, stable hands rushing to accommodate them. A sense of relief and urgency spread among the men already stationed at Winterfell. With the Manderly force bolstering their numbers, they were now close to 3,000 strong. Not a massive army by southern standards, but enough to man the walls and sally forth if needed. Enough, they prayed, to deter an iron-born assault. Jon waited in the drizzle until all the new arrivals passed through. Ser Rodrik gave a short nod of satisfaction. "We are better prepared than we were. That is good." Jon agreed. "Let's pray it's enough." The next few days passed in a flurry of organization. Jon worked closely with Ser Marlon and Ser Rodrik to finalize patrol routes, station men along the roads leading to Winterfell, and dispatch scouts to the west where rumors of Ironborn infiltration were thickest. The tension in the castle gradually settled into a sort of vigilant routine. Men drilled in the courtyard under the watchful eye of Rodrik Castle. Arrows were bundled and the blacksmith's forge hammered day and night to mend armor and weapons. Maester Luwin tended the wounded from the earlier skirmishes, along with those who fell ill. Osha and Hodder assisted Bran and Rickon, ensuring they were never alone, especially at night. Ghost and the other dire wolves roamed the yard and corridors, an ever-present reminder of the old ways. At times, the crisp winter air carried whispers of movement from the outside world. Merchants on the road, small folk fleeing uncertain threats, or a raven from the neck with news of scattered reaver sightings. But no large-scale attack materialized. Jon wondered if perhaps the Ironborn, cunning as they were, had changed course. Or maybe they were simply waiting, letting fear gnaw at the North's defenses. It was on the 5th day since Manderly's arrival that two near-simultaneous events shattered the tense calm. First, a raven arrived from Lady Catelyn. Maester Luwin found Jon in the practice yard, where he was sparring with a few men to keep his sword arm sharp. The maester waved the parchment, breathless. "News from the south," Luwin said. "Lady Catelyn writes that King Renly Baratheon is dead under mysterious circumstances. His forces have either joined Stannis or scattered. Robb continues to hold the Riverlands, but Tywin Lannister massed an army near Harrenhal. Worse, the letter warns that the crown might attempt some underhanded move to take advantage of the North's division." Jon lowered his training sword, chest heaving from exertion. "Renly dead, that will change the shape of the war." And Lady Catelyn heard no word of Sansa or Arya. Luwin shook his head sadly. "She only says that negotiations for Sansa's release are stalled, as Joffrey refuses any compromise. There is no mention of Arya's whereabouts. Lady Catelyn begs the North to remain strong, as Robb's position is precarious." Jon swallowed, a hollow pit forming in his stomach. Each day that Sansa remained a hostage, each day Arya's fate remained unknown, stoked the sense that the world was unraveling. He thanked Luwin, instructing him to share the news with Ser Rodrik, and prepared to address the men about the developments, though he would not dwell on Sansa's peril. The tension was high enough already, but that same evening, as the sun dipped low and the temperature plummeted, a horn's shriek tore through the air. Jon, in the great hall reviewing deployment rosters, shot to his feet. Ghost snarled, hackles rising. Men clutched spears or swords, running toward the courtyard, shouting, "Ironborn! Ironborn at the gates!" Jon bolted outside, the cold biting into his lungs. On the walls, archers were already scurrying to vantage points, fletching arrows. Torches flared, lighting the gloom. Atop the main gatehouse, a guard bellowed, "They come with a flag of parley, my lord. Only a handful of them." Jon's mind whirled. An Ironborn delegation, here at dusk? Could it be a trick to open the gates? He spat a curse and motioned for the men to hold their positions. He ascended the battlements, flanked by Ser Rodrik, who moved surprisingly fast for his age, and Ser Marlon Manderly, face set in grim determination. On the other side of the gate, illuminated by flickering torchlight, stood a group of 5 riders. For bore the sigil of House Greyjoy, a golden kraken on a field of black. The one in front carried a tattered flag of truce. Their armor glinted with the wet sheen of the evening's drizzle, and behind them a handful more Ironborn waited in the shadows, perhaps 20 strong. It was a small party, not enough to challenge the walls directly. Ser Roderick leaned over the parapet, calling out, "Who approaches Winterfell at this hour?" A woman's voice answered, "I am Asha Greyjoy, daughter of Balon Greyjoy, rightful king of the Isles. We come to speak with the one who calls himself Castellan here." Jon's eyes narrowed. Asha Greyjoy, Theon's sister, if rumor was correct. She was known to be bold, cunning, and a formidable fighter. He had never seen her face, only heard talk. Now, from his vantage, he glimpsed a lean figure with short dark hair under a salt-stained cloak perched on a restless mount. He considered his response carefully. "I am Jon Snow, Castellan by command of King Robb Stark. State your business." Her laughter carried across the gate like a knife's edge. "Jon Snow, the bastard who deserted the Night's Watch, or so they say. And now you fancy yourself Warden of Winterfell. What strange times these are." Her tone held mockery, but also a note of curiosity. "Open your gates, Snow, and let us speak face to face." Jon's jaw clenched. "You expect us to open the gates to Ironborn raiders? I think not. Say what you came to say from there, or not at all." Asha gave a small, theatrical sigh. "We come under a flag of parley which your lords should respect. But very well. I bring an offer: surrender Winterfell peacefully, and my father will let your men leave unmolested. You'll have safe passage north or wherever you wish to go, so long as you abandon the castle." Ser Roderick barked a harsh laugh. "Surrender Winterfell? Are you mad, woman? This castle has never fallen to your kind. The north stands strong." Asha's tone sharpened. "The north stands divided, old man. King Robb bleeds in the Riverlands, and the rest of you cower behind walls while the Kraken claims your coasts. Balon Greyjoy is prepared to push deeper. We already hold Deepwood Motte. My men have feasted in its hall. If you think your precious keep is safe, well, you might be surprised how easy it is to breach old stones." Jon's heart twisted at the confirmation Deepwood Motte had fallen. That was grave news indeed, leaving the northwestern approach to Winterfell threatened. He steeled himself, voice steady. "Winterfell will never yield to Ironborn. Is that all you have to say?" Asha paused, letting the words hang. Then she spoke again, more softly. "I once thought the Starks were men of sense. But maybe you're too proud to see reason. Surrender, save your men, your small folk, your precious little lords and cripples within these walls. Or fight and watch them burn. I don't relish slaughter, not truly. But I'll do it if you force me." Jon's grip on the crenellation turned wine-knuckled. The mention of cripples cut him to the core. Bran. He swallowed the fury that threatened to erupt. "You'll find more than you bargained for here, Greyjoy. Winterfell does not break." Asha's lips twisted in a smirk visible even from the wall. "You cling to that name as if it can shield you from iron. If you had any sense, you'd know that a war on two fronts dooms the north. The Iron Islands rise. We will carve out our peace while your king in the north fights in vain down south. But have it your way. We'll give you 2 days to rethink. After that, we take what we want." Ser Marlin bristled. "Leave before we fill you with arrows, woman." She gave a short, mocking bow. "Farewell, bastard. Enjoy your illusions of safety while they last." She yanked her reins, turning her horse. The Ironborn party rode away into the drizzle, disappearing into the twilight gloom. The guards let out a collective breath. One muttered curses under his breath, another spat over the wall. Jon watched until the last silhouette vanished. Then he turned to Ser Roderick and Ser Marlin, voice grim. "They hold Deepwood Motte. That is dire news. We can assume they have a foothold in the west. If they gather enough strength, they could attempt a siege here." Ser Marlin nodded stiffly. "We have the numbers to man these walls, but we can't ignore them picking off holdfasts. Or if they slip in through cunning." Ser Roderick set his jaw. "They can try, but will not fall easily." Jon nodded, though dread coiled in his stomach. Asha's threat was real. She offered a chance to surrender, but Jon knew that was no chance at all. Surrendering Winterfell was unthinkable. The fear was that she might indeed attempt a swift, brutal assault, or perhaps starve them out if she commanded enough men to surround the castle. With the path to Deepwood Motte compromised, lines of supply could be threatened, and if Moat Cailin also fell, the north would be entirely isolated from Robb's forces. Above them, the sky darkened, a cold wind sweeping across the battlements. Jon inhaled the damp air. "We have 2 days, or so she claims. We won't use them to wait. Ser Roderick, prepare scouts to track their movements. We must not let them close in unseen. Ser Marlin, Ensure the cavalry remains ready to ride if we must strike first. Or if we see an opening to retake Deepwood Motte, we might consider that. Ser Marlin raised a brow. You'd consider an offensive? That's risky. It is, Jon admitted. But letting the Ironborn gather unchallenged might be riskier. We'll weigh our options carefully. Ser Roderick gave a short nod. We'll do what needs doing. They descended the walls to plan. That night, Winterfell's halls thrummed with urgency. Men sharpened swords by torchlight, archers checked their quivers, and everyone prepared for a siege that might come at any moment. In the highest tower of the keep, Jon stood at a narrow window, gazing into the gloom, searching for any sign of the Ironborn approach. Only darkness and the flicker of distant lightning answered. He thought of Sansa in a different cage, a Lannister threat. Thought of Arya, lost somewhere in the war-torn south. Thought of Robb, fighting an ever-shifting battle. Here he was, the bastard who deserted the Night's Watch, entrusted with the seat of House Stark. Asha Greyjoy's words echoed in his mind. Enjoy your illusions of safety. A swirl of self-doubt flared, but he steadied himself with an image of Ned Stark's face, calm and resolute. Jon could almost hear his father's voice. When the snows fall and the white winds blow, the lone wolf dies but the pack survives. He was not alone. Even if the North was divided, if the men whispered about his parentage, if the Ironborn threatened the walls, he had to believe in that. The pack survived together. Tomorrow, he would send riders to check the roads, to see if Asha Greyjoy's threat was more than bluster. If they found her force mustering, perhaps he would lead a sortie. The thought of leading men into open battle was daunting, but it might be better than being bottled up within these walls, waiting to be attacked. He prayed for guidance, for some hint of the best path. All he heard was the drumbeat of his own heart. He stayed there for a long time, staring into the darkness, until the torch outside guttered low and a quiet hush fell over the castle. Eventually, Ghost nudged his hand, as if urging him to rest. Jon turned away from the window and made his way to the small bedchamber set aside for him as Castellan. He had to sleep, if only for a few hours, for the dawn would bring new decisions, new trials. As he settled onto the hard mattress, he felt the hum of tension in every muscle. The faint howling of the wind curled through the window slits, a mournful lament. He closed his eyes, letting exhaustion pull him into a fitful slumber. His dreams were jumbled. A swirl of iron krakens, flayed men, and the looming specter of Ned Stark's head on a spike. Through it all, a silent figure of a woman, face half hidden in shadows, whispered words he could not understand. He awoke before sunrise, heart pounding, the echoes of the dream fading like mist. With a long exhale, Jon rose, donned his cloak and sword belt, and stepped into the corridor. Today, he would not wait for the Ironborn's move. He would gather his council, weigh the intelligence his scouts brought back, and if an opportunity to strike first presented itself, he might take it. Let the Ironborn see that Winterfell would not cower. Yet a single misstep, a single wrong decision, could shatter the North's fragile defense. As he walked the quiet halls, lit by sputtering torches, he sensed that Winterfell itself was holding its breath. Rickon and Bran still slept, safe for now. The men in the courtyard dozed in shifts, ready at a moment's notice. The dire wolves prowled the perimeter. Each stone of the ancient walls seemed to hum with the unspoken vow that House Stark would endure. But the question gnawed at Jon. Could they endure the storm with the North divided, with rumors swirling of a Targaryen bastard in their midst, with Ironborn hammers on the horizon? He pushed the doubt down, focusing on the immediate step. Protect Winterfell. Honor Ned Stark's memory. Dawn broke pale and cold, and Jon Snow descended to the yard, Ghost at his side, determined to fight for the only home he had ever known. If the Ironborn sought to break the bastion of the Starks, they would find it guarded by a bastard wolf, fueled by the memory of a father's honor and the unyielding will of the North. Thus, the stage was set for the next clash in a realm that teetered on the brink of ruination, each faction clinging to scraps of power and hope. And at the heart of it all, Jon Snow braced himself for the day when the greatest secret of his heritage might collide with the fate of Winterfell, perhaps to unite the North or to destroy it. No man, not even Jon, could say which it would be, but he would stand upon these walls, sword in hand, until the bitter end. For winter was coming, the darkest winter in living memory, and only those who fought with unwavering resolve had any chance to see the spring.